Standing frozen at my brother Tyler's promotion party, I watched the crowd's laughter die as CEO Marcus Hamilton entered the upscale restaurant's private dining room. Tyler's cruel toast still echoed through the silence. My sister got fired again, maybe stick to stripping. Our father Gerald had chuckled, adding, "At least she's good at that." The champagne glass trembled in my hand as Marcus's piercing blue eyes locked onto my face across the room, filled with Tyler's colleagues from Henderson and Associates Marketing. Recognition flashed across his expression, and my heart stopped. This was the same Marcus Hamilton I had saved from career destruction 3 years ago. 30 minutes earlier, I had arrived at Santino's Bistro wearing my best professional dress, a navy blue sheath that I'd purchased during better times. The maitre d' had directed me to the private dining room where Tyler's celebration was already in full swing. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over mahogany tables adorned with white roses and flickering candles. The scent of garlic and fresh bread mingled with expensive cologne and perfume. Tyler spotted me immediately and rushed over, his face flushed with champagne and excitement. At 31, he maintained the same confident swagger he'd possessed since high school, his sandy brown hair perfectly styled and his charcoal suit clearly expensive. "Judith, you made it." He embraced me with theatrical enthusiasm before turning to address the room. "Everyone meet my little sister." The dozen or so guests turned toward us with polite smiles. I recognized a few faces from Tyler's social media posts, his colleagues and superiors from the marketing firm. There was Janet Rodriguez, the company's creative director, wearing an elegant black cocktail dress, and Bill Thompson, Tyler's former cubicle neighbor, now sporting a promotion of his own. Sarah Chen stood near the bar chatting with 2 other women I didn't recognize, all impeccably dressed and radiating professional success. Judith just finished her master's degree in business ethics, Tyler announced, though his tone carried an undertone I couldn't quite place. She's currently between opportunities. Between opportunities. The euphemism stung worse than outright honesty would have. I forced a smile and accepted a glass of champagne from a passing server. "Congratulations on your promotion, Tyler. Account supervisor is a big step." "Senior account supervisor." He corrected his chest puffing slightly. "Youngest in the company's history." Gerald appeared at my elbow, his weathered face beaming with paternal pride. At 58, our father showed the wear of his years, his graying hair thinning and his waistline expanding, despite his attempts to hide it with well-tailored clothing. "My boy's going places," he declared, wrapping an arm around Tyler's shoulders. "Always knew he had the drive." The conversation flowed around me as Tyler regaled his audience with stories of landing major clients and exceeding sales targets. I sipped my champagne and tried to project confidence, though internally I felt like an imposter among these successful professionals. My own career trajectory had become a series of disasters that I couldn't fully explain without sounding like I was making excuses. So Judith, Janet Rodriguez, approached me with genuine curiosity. "What kind of work are you looking for? Tyler mentioned you have experience in business analysis." Before I could respond, Tyler interjected with a laugh that seemed too loud. "Oh, Judy's had quite the adventure in the corporate world. Tell them about your recent positions." My stomach clenched. There was something predatory in his expression, a gleam I remembered from childhood when he was about to embarrass me in front of his friends. "I've been exploring different opportunities to find the right fit," I said carefully. "Different opportunities," Tyler repeated, swirling his champagne. "That's one way to put it. How many jobs has it been now? 4, 5, what?" The room grew quieter, conversations tapering off as people sensed drama brewing. I felt heat creeping up my neck. Career transitions can be complex. "Transitions," Gerald chuckled, shaking his head. "That's what we're calling it now." Tyler's supervisor, a distinguished woman in her 40s named Patricia Walsh, joined our circle. "Career changes are completely normal," she said diplomatically. "The market's been challenging for everyone." "Oh, it's not the market," Tyler said, his voice carrying easily across the room now. "Judy just has trouble with authority figures. Don't you, sis?" I set down my champagne glass, my hands beginning to shake, with a combination of anger and humiliation. That's not accurate. Come on. Tyler pressed his audience, now fully engaged. Tell them about Morrison Tech. Or was it Sterling Consulting where you had the big blow-up with management? The guests exchanged uncomfortable glances, unsure whether this was playful sibling banter or something more serious. I could see Patricia Walsh's expression shift from polite interest to concern. Tyler, maybe we should focus on celebrating your achievement, I said quietly. But your achievements are so much more entertaining, Tyler exclaimed, raising his voice to address the entire room. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to propose a toast. My blood turned to ice water as Tyler lifted his champagne flute high above his head. Gerald grinned expectantly, clearly, anticipating whatever his son was about to say. The room fell silent except for the soft jazz music playing in the background. To family. Tyler began, his voice carrying a mock solemnity that made my skin crawl. And to learning from each other's mistakes. He paused dramatically, his eyes finding mine across the circle. My sister Judith got fired again this month, 4th time in 2 years if anyone's keeping track. Gasps rippled through the room. Janet Rodriguez looked horrified while Bill Thompson stared into his drink. Patricia Walsh's mouth fell open slightly. But Tyler wasn't finished. Maybe it's time to consider alternative career paths, Judy. Have you thought about stripping? I hear the money's decent, and you wouldn't have to worry about those pesky workplace policies. The silence that followed was deafening. My vision blurred at the edges as shame and rage warred within my chest. But before I could process the full impact of Tyler's cruelty, Gerald's voice cut through the quiet. At least she'd be good at something, he said with a chuckle that sounded like glass breaking in my ears. The girl's got to find her niche somewhere. Laughter erupted from several guests, nervous and uncomfortable, but still audible. Others looked away, clearly mortified by what they'd witnessed. I stood there, frozen, my dignity stripped away in front of a room full of strangers, feeling smaller than I had since middle school. That's when the dining room door opened and everything changed. Marcus Hamilton stepped through the entrance with the quiet authority that commanded attention without demanding it. At 35, he possessed the kind of presence that filled a room, naturally his dark hair touched with premature silver at the temples, and his steel-gray eyes taking in the scene with analytical precision. He wore a midnight blue suit that spoke of custom tailoring and expensive taste, but it was his bearing rather than his clothing that marked him as someone significant. The laughter died instantly as heads turned toward the newcomer. Tyler's face went pale, his champagne glass hovering halfway to his lips as recognition dawned. "Mr. Hamilton," he stammered, setting down his drink with shaking hands. "I didn't expect you tonight." Marcus's gaze swept the room briefly before settling on my face with an intensity that made my breath catch. For a moment that stretched like eternity, neither of us spoke. I could see the wheels turning in his mind as he processed my appearance, my name from Tyler's introduction, and the context of what he'd obviously overheard. "Judith Parker," he said finally, his voice carrying clearly across the silent room. "I've been trying to reach you for 2 years." The statement hit the gathering like a physical blow. Tyler's mouth fell open while Gerald's smug expression melted into confusion. Patricia Walsh looked between Marcus and me with growing bewilderment, clearly trying to understand the connection between her company's potential major client and Tyler's supposedly unsuccessful sister. I found my voice, though it came out smaller than I intended. "Mr. Hamilton, I wasn't expecting to see you here." "Apparently not," Marcus replied, his tone carefully neutral, but his eyes never leaving mine. "Though perhaps I should have anticipated finding you at Tyler Parker's celebration. The family connection wasn't mentioned in our previous correspondence attempts." Tyler stepped forward, desperation creeping into his voice. "Sir, I can explain about my sister's employment situation. She's been going through some challenges, but it doesn't reflect on our family's professional standards or my ability to handle the data flow account." Marcus finally shifted his attention to Tyler, and the younger man visibly wilted under the scrutiny. Your sister's employment situation is precisely what I'd like to discuss. With her. The room buzzed with confused murmurs as guests tried to piece together what was happening. I felt dizzy, my mind racing back to that pivotal day 3 years ago at Dataflow Industries, when everything had seemed so different, so full of possibility. I had been 25 then, fresh from completing my MBA, and thrilled to land an analyst position at one of the city's most respected technology companies. Dataflow specialized in cloud storage solutions for major corporations, and I'd been assigned to the financial analysis team under the supervision of Robert Chen, a veteran accountant with 20 years' experience. My cubicle had been small but organized with a view of the parking lot and a motivational poster my mother had given me featuring a sunrise over mountains. I'd arrived early every morning, stayed late when necessary, and threw myself into understanding the intricate financial systems that kept Dataflow running. It was during my 3rd month that I'd noticed the discrepancies. Small at first, just numbers that didn't quite align between quarterly reports and individual department budgets. Most people would have dismissed them as rounding errors or timing differences between accounting periods. But my master's thesis had focused on forensic accounting techniques, and something about the patterns bothered me. I'd spent my evenings running additional calculations, cross-referencing expenditure reports with vendor invoices, and slowly building a picture that made my stomach turn. Someone was stealing from Dataflow. Not petty cash or office supplies, but substantial amounts channeled through false vendor payments and inflated contract fees. The thief was sophisticated, spreading the theft across multiple departments and using legitimate-looking documentation to cover their tracks. When I'd first approached Robert Chen with my concerns, he dismissed them with patronizing patience. "Judith, honey, you're new to corporate finance. These kinds of variances are normal in a company this size. Don't go looking for problems that don't exist." But I'd persisted, staying late to refine my analysis and document every suspicious transaction. The evidence was overwhelming. Over the past 18 months, someone had diverted nearly $400,000 from company accounts. The trail led to Vincent Morrison, the vice president of operations and Robert Chen's immediate supervisor. Morrison was a company veteran, respected and trusted, with access to the authorization codes necessary for the sophisticated fraud I'd uncovered. That's where Marcus Hamilton had entered the picture. As Dataflow's director of strategic planning, Marcus had been Vincent Morrison's peer, reporting directly to CEO Amanda Foster. When I'd finally gathered enough evidence to present my findings, Robert Chen had grudgingly agreed to schedule a meeting with Marcus, though he'd made it clear he thought I was wasting everyone's time. I remembered that conference room so clearly: the polished oak table, the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown traffic, and Marcus sitting across from me with his laptop open, his expression skeptical but polite. He'd been younger then, his hair darker, and his manner less assured, though no less intelligent. "Ms. Parker," he'd said after reviewing my preliminary report, "these are serious allegations. Vincent Morrison has been with Dataflow for 8 years. He's up for promotion to senior vice president next quarter." "I understand that, sir," I'd replied, my voice steady despite my nerves. "But the evidence speaks for itself. Someone with high-level access has been systematically stealing from the company, and the authorization patterns match Mr. Morrison's access credentials." Marcus had leaned back in his chair, studying me with those penetrating gray eyes. "And you're confident in this analysis?" "Completely confident. Even though you've been here less than 6 months and Vincent Morrison has a spotless record and the full confidence of senior management." The question had been fair but challenging, designed to test my conviction. "Sir, I've triple-checked every calculation and verified every data source. I've been conservative in my estimates and excluded any transactions that could reasonably be explained by legitimate business activity. What remains is a clear pattern of theft." Marcus had spent the next hour grilling me on methodology assumptions and potential alternative explanations. With each question, I'd provided detailed responses, supporting documentation and additional analysis that reinforced my conclusions. Finally, he'd closed his laptop and looked at me directly. "Assuming you're correct, Ms. Parker, do you understand what this means? We're talking about accusing a senior executive of embezzlement. If you're wrong, your career at Dataflow is over. If you're right but can't prove it conclusively, your career at Dataflow is also over. I understand the risks, I'd said quietly, but I can't ignore what I've found. Marcus had nodded slowly, something like respect flickering in his expression. Give me 48 hours to conduct my own review. Don't discuss this with anyone else until you hear from me. Those 48 hours had been the longest of my professional life. I'd gone through the motions of my regular duties while wondering if I'd just committed career suicide. Robert Chen had avoided eye contact, clearly regretting his decision to support my investigation. My cubicle had felt like a prison as I'd waited for Marcus's verdict. When he'd finally called me back to the conference room, his expression had been grim. Ms. Parker, I owe you an apology and a debt of gratitude. Sir, your analysis was not only correct but conservative. My independent investigation suggests the total theft may exceed $600,000 over 2 years. Vincent Morrison has been very clever, but you found the patterns that exposed him. The memory of that moment still gave me chills, the validation, the relief, the terrifying realization that my instincts had been right and that Dataflow had been hemorrhaging money while everyone trusted the thief implicitly. What happens now? I'd asked. Now we build an airtight case and present it to the board. Morrison will be terminated and likely face criminal charges. The company will implement new financial controls to prevent this from happening again. And you, Ms. Parker, will have my personal recommendation for any position you want within Dataflow or elsewhere. But that wasn't how the story had ended. Marcus's voice in the present pulled me back from my memories. Judith, I think we need to talk privately. Would you excuse us for a moment? Marcus gestured toward a quiet corner of the dining room, away from the cluster of bewildered guests who were still processing the unexpected turn of events. I followed him, acutely aware of every eye in the room, tracking our movement. Tyler remained frozen near the bar, his face cycling through expressions of confusion, fear, and dawning comprehension. 3 years, Marcus said quietly once we were out of easy earshot. I've been trying to contact you for 3 years, and I find you here being humiliated by your own family. The kindness in his voice nearly undid me. I'd grown so accustomed to defending myself, to explaining and justifying and apologizing, that genuine concern felt overwhelming. It's complicated. I imagine it is. Marcus's expression was thoughtful, his gaze steady and patient. But I'd like to understand. The Judith Parker I worked with at Dataflow was brilliant, ethical, and fearless. What happened? The question hung between us like a challenge. I could deflect, minimize, or offer some sanitized version that wouldn't make me sound like a perpetual victim. But something about Marcus's directness invited honesty. You want the real story. I want the truth. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what would likely sound like a litany of excuses. After Dataflow, I thought I'd proven myself. Vincent Morrison was convicted of embezzlement. The company recovered most of the stolen funds, and I received that glowing recommendation you promised. I figured landing my next position would be straightforward. But it wasn't. Morrison Tech offered me a senior analyst role with a substantial salary increase. For 6 months, everything seemed perfect. I was working on a major project to streamline their procurement process, reporting directly to the CFO, building a reputation as someone who could spot inefficiencies and implement solutions. Marcus nodded encouragingly, and I continued. Then my direct supervisor, Bradley Evans, started making comments about my appearance. At first it was subtle, compliments that lasted too long, observations about my clothes that felt inappropriate. Then he started suggesting dinner meetings at expensive restaurants, always just the two of us. When I declined and insisted on conducting business in the office, he became hostile. Sexual harassment. Blatant sexual harassment. He started questioning my work quality, excluding me from important meetings, and making comments about my professionalism in front of other staff. When I documented the behavior and reported it to Human Resources, they conducted what they called an investigation. 2 weeks later, I was terminated for creating a hostile work environment. Marcus's jaw tightened, his hands clenching slightly at his sides. They blamed you for reporting harassment. Apparently, Bradley Evans was the CFO's nephew and a rising star in the company. My word against his wasn't much of a contest. The bitterness in my voice surprised me. I'd thought I'd moved past the anger, but apparently it still lived just beneath the surface. "That's unconscionable," Marcus said flatly. "But surely other companies recognized that you were terminated for illegitimate reasons. You'd think so, wouldn't you?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Creative Solutions hired me based on my data flow recommendation, and initially everything went smoothly. I was brought in to analyze their client billing practices and identify opportunities for efficiency improvements. Let me guess. You found something they didn't want you to find. I found that they were systematically overbilling clients by inflating project hours and adding phantom expenses to invoices. When I brought this to management's attention, they thanked me for my diligence and assured me they'd address the issues. Marcus waited for the inevitable conclusion. Instead of fixing the billing problems, they created false documentation to justify the inflated charges and instructed me to modify my reports to support their version of events. When I refused to falsify client reports, they terminated me for insubordination and failing to follow direct orders. My God. Sterling Consulting was next. They specialized in financial audits for small businesses, and I thought working with smaller clients might be more straightforward. I discovered that they were manipulating audit results to hide their clients' financial problems in exchange for higher fees. Companies that should have failed their audits were receiving clean reports because they paid premium rates for Sterling's services. And you reported this as well. I tried to work within the system. I approached my supervisor with concerns about specific audit discrepancies and suggested additional verification procedures. Instead of addressing the issues, they accused me of exceeding my authority and questioning the judgment of senior partners. I was terminated for violating company protocols and undermining client relationships. Marcus shook his head in disbelief. 3 companies, 3 ethical violations, 3 terminations for doing the right thing. Bradford Marketing was the final straw. I thought working in marketing would be safer than financial analysis. Less opportunity for fraud, fewer ethical gray areas. I was so naive. What happened there? They were engaging in systematic discrimination during their hiring process. Resumes with ethnic-sounding names were automatically rejected. Qualified female candidates were passed over for male applicants with inferior credentials, and they maintained informal quotas to limit diversity in client-facing positions. Illegal hiring practices. When I discovered email chains documenting these policies, I brought them to the attention of the HR director. She assured me the company would investigate and correct any problems. Instead, they conducted an internal review that found no evidence of discrimination and suggested that I might be more comfortable working somewhere with different corporate values. They fired you for reporting discrimination. They eliminated my position due to restructuring and budget constraints. Pure coincidence, according to the termination letter. The words tasted bitter even now, months later. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his expression cycling through anger, disbelief, and what looked like genuine regret. When he finally spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. "Judith, I need you to know that none of this was your fault. You were doing exactly what any ethical professional should do in those situations. The fact that you faced retaliation instead of recognition speaks to the failures of those organizations, not to any weakness on your part." His words were like balm on wounds I'd thought had healed. For months, I'd wondered if I was too inflexible, too quick to see problems, too unwilling to adapt to different corporate cultures. Tyler's constant criticism had reinforced my self-doubt, and Gerald's disappointment had made me question my judgment. "But why were you trying to contact me?" I asked. After what happened at Dataflow, I assumed our professional relationship had ended. Marcus's expression shifted, a hint of frustration creeping into his voice. I've been trying to recruit you for 2 years. After Vincent Morrison's conviction, I was promoted to Chief Operating Officer and eventually CEO. Dataflow has grown significantly, and we've made ethics and compliance a cornerstone of our corporate culture. I wanted you to head our new ethics and compliance department. My heart stopped. You wanted to offer me a job? Not just any job, a senior executive position with full authority to investigate potential violations, implement preventive measures, and report directly to me. The kind of role that would utilize your analytical skills while protecting you from retaliation. But I never heard from you. I've sent dozens of emails to the address we had on file, left voicemails at your old phone number, and even hired a recruiting firm to track down your current contact information. Every attempt hit a dead end. A cold realization began to form in my mind. What address did you have on file? Marcus pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts. Let me check. Here it is. Your Dataflow emergency contact listing shows Tyler Parker as your primary contact with a note that all professional correspondence should be directed through him for family coordination purposes. The dining room seemed to tilt around me as the pieces clicked into place. Tyler has been intercepting your messages. It appears so. The recruiting firm reported that they'd spoken with your brother about potential opportunities, and he'd indicated that you weren't interested in positions that would require extensive travel or high-pressure environments. They were told you were focusing on smaller local companies that would provide better work-life balance. Tyler's betrayal hit me like a physical blow. While I'd been struggling to rebuild my career facing rejection after rejection, my own brother had been sabotaging opportunities that could have changed my life. The magnitude of his deception was staggering. There's more. Marcus continued, his voice gentle but implacable. Tyler has been actively undermining your professional reputation in networking circles, where you both had connections. He spread rumors about your reliability, suggested that your terminations were due to personality conflicts with supervisors, and implied that you have difficulty accepting feedback and following directions. The betrayal was complete. Not only had Tyler intercepted opportunities for advancement, but he'd poisoned the well against future prospects. His humiliating toast tonight wasn't an isolated incident of cruelty. It was the culmination of a systematic campaign to sabotage my career while building his own. Why? The question came out as barely a whisper. Why would he do this? Marcus looked across the room toward Tyler, who was engaged in an animated conversation with Patricia Walsh, his hands gesturing frantically as he tried to explain something. I can only speculate, but in my experience, people who tear others down do so because they're afraid of being overshadowed. Your success would have highlighted his own mediocrity. The truth of his observation settled over me like a heavy blanket. Tyler had always been competitive, but I'd attributed it to normal sibling rivalry. I'd never imagined that his need to excel would drive him to actively sabotage my chances for success. Judith, Marcus said quietly, I'm going to ask you something, and I want you to consider your answer carefully. If I were to offer you the position at Dataflow right now, tonight, would you be interested? I looked at him, this man who'd seen my potential 3 years ago and had been trying to reach me ever since. The room around us was filled with the low buzz of confused conversation as Tyler's colleagues tried to understand what was happening. In the corner of my vision, I could see Tyler watching us with barely concealed panic. Yes, I said firmly. I would be very interested. Marcus smiled for the first time that evening, and something tight in my chest began to loosen. Good. But first, I think we need to address the situation with your brother, because this conversation has implications that extend far beyond just the two of us. Marcus straightened his shoulders and turned back toward the main gathering, his expression shifting from warmth to the cold professionalism of a CEO who just discovered a serious problem. I followed, my legs unsteady, but my resolve strengthening with each step. The room fell silent as we approached Tyler, who was still talking rapidly to Patricia Walsh in what appeared to be damage control mode. "Tyler Marcus," said his voice carrying the authority that commanded attention throughout the dining room. "I believe we need to discuss your recent communications regarding your sister's career status." Tyler's face went pale, his champagne glass trembling slightly in his hand. "Sir, I'm not sure what you mean. I haven't discussed Judith's situation with anyone from Dataflow." "That's interesting," Marcus replied, pulling out his phone with deliberate precision, "because I have email records showing multiple exchanges between you and my recruiting firm over the past 18 months. Would you like me to read them aloud?" The room's atmosphere grew thick with tension as Patricia Walsh stepped back, clearly recognizing that she was witnessing something far more serious than family drama. Janet Rodriguez and Bill Thompson exchanged worried glances, while Sarah Chen moved closer to hear better. Tyler's mouth opened and closed soundlessly before he managed to stammer, Those conversations were taken out of context." "Were they?" Marcus's thumb scrolled across his phone screen. "Here's an email from March 15th of last year. Dear Mr. Hamilton, thank you for your continued interest in my sister Judith's career prospects. However, after her recent employment difficulties, she's decided to focus on smaller local opportunities that won't require the kind of high-pressure environment that Dataflow represents. She's concerned about her ability to handle corporate politics and prefers positions with less responsibility and oversight." Tyler's face cycled through several shades of red as the words hung in the air. Gerald, who had been listening with growing confusion, stepped forward. "Son, what is Mr. Hamilton talking about? Or perhaps you'd prefer this one from June," Marcus continued relentlessly. Quote, "Judith has expressed concerns about working for technology companies given her previous experiences. She feels that her analytical style doesn't align well with corporate expectations, and she's looking for opportunities that would be more forgiving of her tendency to overcomplicate straightforward business processes." "That's not what I said," Tyler protested weakly, but his voice lacked conviction. "Actually, those are direct quotes from emails you sent using your personal account. My recruiting firm maintains detailed records of all candidate communications." Marcus's tone remained professionally neutral, but there was steel underneath. "You also spoke with my HR director by phone in September, correct?" Tyler's shoulders sagged as he realized there was no escape from the documentation trail. "I was trying to protect her." "Protect her from what exactly?" I asked, finding my voice despite the rage building in my chest. "From career opportunities, from professional advancement, from success." "You don't understand the pressure in corporate environments," Tyler said desperately, turning to address the room as if seeking support. "Judith's always been sensitive about criticism. I thought smaller companies would be better for her personality type." Marcus's laugh was cold and humorless. Sensitive about criticism. The woman who exposed major embezzlement at Dataflow and testified against a senior executive is sensitive about criticism. The guests murmured among themselves, clearly struggling to reconcile Tyler's portrayal of me with Marcus's version. Patricia Walsh looked particularly troubled, her brow furrowed as she studied both Tyler and me with new interest. Furthermore, Marcus continued, his voice gaining intensity, "We have reports that you've been spreading misinformation about Judith's employment history in professional networking groups. Specifically, you've suggested that her terminations were due to personality conflicts with supervisors and an inability to accept feedback." Gerald's face darkened as the implications became clear. "Tyler, you told me Judith was having problems because she couldn't get along with her bosses." "She was having problems," Tyler insisted, sweat beading on his forehead despite the dining room's comfortable temperature. "Every job ended badly." "Every job ended with her reporting ethical violations and facing retaliation," Marcus corrected sharply. "Morrison Tech terminated her for reporting sexual harassment. Creative Solutions fired her for refusing to falsify client reports. Sterling Consulting let her go for questioning fraudulent audit practices. Bradford Marketing eliminated her position after she documented discriminatory hiring practices. The silence that followed was deafening. Patricia Walsh's expression had shifted from confusion to horror as she processed the implications. Janet Rodriguez looked sick, while Bill Thompson stared at Tyler as if seeing him clearly for the first time. "You knew all this?" Gerald asked Tyler, his voice barely controlled. "You knew why she was really fired." Tyler's composure finally cracked completely. She was always causing trouble. Every job she'd find something wrong, something that didn't meet her impossible standards. I was trying to help her understand that sometimes you have to adapt, you have to compromise. "Compromise your ethics?" I asked quietly. "Compromise your integrity? Stay silent while people steal money and harass employees and discriminate against qualified candidates?" "Yes." Tyler exploded, his facade of brotherly concern evaporating entirely. "Sometimes that's what it takes to succeed in the real world. You can't just charge into every situation like some crusading white knight and expect to keep your job." The dining room erupted in shocked murmurs. Patricia Walsh took another step back from Tyler, her face reflecting growing disgust. Sarah Chen shook her head slowly while Janet Rodriguez whispered something to Bill Thompson that made him wince. "But that wasn't enough for you, was it, Tyler?" Marcus pressed on, his voice relentless. "It wasn't enough to convince Judith to compromise her principles. You had to actively sabotage her opportunities for positions where integrity would be valued." "I was protecting her from herself," Tyler said weakly, but the fight had gone out of him. "No," I said, stepping closer to my brother, "you were protecting yourself from me." Tyler's eyes darted around the room, seeking escape from the accusations and the judgment written on every face. "What are you talking about?" "You were afraid that if I succeeded, if I found a position where my ethics and analytical skills were valued instead of punished, it would highlight your own willingness to cut corners and compromise your principles. You needed me to fail to justify your own choices." The truth of my words hung in the air like an indictment. Tyler's mouth worked soundlessly as he struggled to formulate a response that wouldn't further condemn him. Marcus nodded approvingly at my analysis before delivering the final blow. "There's one more thing, Tyler. The promotion you're celebrating tonight, your new role as senior account supervisor, it was contingent on your ability to manage the potential Data Flow Industries account." Tyler's face went white. "Sir, Dataflow has been considering Henderson and Associates for a major marketing contract worth approximately $2 million annually over 3 years. Your promotion was specifically designed to position you as the primary account manager for that relationship." Patricia Walsh's sharp intake of breath was audible across the room. The other guests exchanged alarmed glances as the financial implications became clear. "However," Marcus continued with devastating calm, "given what I've learned tonight about your character, your dishonesty, and your willingness to sabotage family members for personal gain, I'm withdrawing Dataflow's consideration of Henderson and Associates as a potential partner." The words hit Tyler like a physical blow. He staggered backward, his champagne glass slipping from nerveless fingers to shatter on the hardwood floor. Patricia Walsh looked stricken, clearly understanding the professional catastrophe unfolding before her eyes. "Mr. Hamilton." Patricia began desperately, "Surely we can discuss this. Tyler's personal family issues don't reflect the quality or integrity of our entire firm." "Don't they?" Marcus asked mildly. "Tyler's promotion was based partly on his claims about mentoring his sister through career difficulties and providing family stability during challenging times. If those claims were fabricated, what does that say about Henderson and Associates' due diligence in evaluating their employees?" Tyler's world was collapsing in real time. Not only was the major account disappearing, but his promotion itself was now in jeopardy. The very lies he'd told to build his career were destroying the foundation of his professional life. "Please," Tyler whispered, his voice cracking with desperation, "don't punish the entire company for my mistakes. Patricia and the others had nothing to do with this." You're right, Marcus agreed. They didn't. But you did, and you were specifically promoted to manage the data flow relationship. How can I trust Henderson and Associates with a multi-million-dollar contract when their designated account manager has demonstrated such profound dishonesty? Gerald stepped forward, his face ashen with the realization of what his son had done. Mr. Hamilton Tyler made serious mistakes, but surely there's some way to resolve this situation. Marcus looked at Gerald for a long moment before responding. Mr. Parker, your son has systematically sabotaged his sister's career for 3 years, while building his own advancement on lies about his character and family relationships. The professional damage he's caused extends far beyond just personal family dynamics. The room remained frozen in tense silence as the full scope of Tyler's betrayal settled over everyone present. I stood watching my brother's face crumble as he confronted the consequences of his choices, feeling a mixture of vindication and sadness that surprised me with its intensity. But as devastating as this revelation was, I sensed that Marcus wasn't finished. There was something else, some additional piece of information that would complete Tyler's professional destruction and my own vindication. However, Marcus said, finally his voice dropping to a quieter register that somehow carried more menace than his previous pronouncements, there's one more issue we need to address, and this one involves not just Tyler's career, but potentially his freedom. Marcus's ominous words sent a chill through the dining room that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. Tyler's face drained of what little color remained, while Patricia Walsh gripped the back of a nearby chair as if she needed physical support. "What do you mean about his freedom?" Gerald asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Marcus reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a leather portfolio, opening it to reveal several sheets of printed documents. Dataflow Industries has been conducting preliminary due diligence on Henderson and Associates for the past 6 months in preparation for our potential partnership. As part of that process, we requested financial records, client lists, and employee backgrounds for all personnel who would be involved in managing our account. Patricia Walsh's professional composure cracked visibly. "Mr. Hamilton, I can assure you that all our employee records are completely up to date and accurate." "I'm sure they are," Marcus replied smoothly. However, our forensic accounting firm noticed some interesting patterns in the expense reports and client billing records for accounts managed by Tyler Parker over the past 8 months. Tyler made a choking sound, his hand moving instinctively to loosen his tie. "There's been some confusion about expense categorizations, but nothing inappropriate." Confusion. Marcus repeated the word, dripping with skepticism. "Is that what you call billing personal expenses to client accounts, or submitting duplicate expense reports for the same business trips, or inflating travel costs and pocketing the difference?" The guests gasped collectively, their shock palpable, as the magnitude of Tyler's misconduct became clear. Janet Rodriguez covered her mouth with her hand, while Bill Thompson shook his head in disbelief. Patricia Walsh looked like she might faint. "Tyler, please tell me this isn't true." "It's not what it sounds like," Tyler said desperately, sweat now visible on his forehead. "There were some accounting errors, some miscommunications about billing procedures. I can explain everything." Marcus flipped to another page in his portfolio. "Can you explain why you billed Dataflow Industries for a weekend trip to Las Vegas that was clearly personal in nature? The hotel charges included spa services, expensive dinners at restaurants that aren't business appropriate, and entertainment expenses that have nothing to do with marketing services." "That was a legitimate business development trip?" Tyler protested weakly. "To develop business with whom?" Marcus asked sharply. "Dataflow wasn't even a Henderson client at the time. You billed us retroactively for expenses incurred 3 months before our companies had any formal relationship." The silence stretched unbearably as Tyler realized he'd been caught in an obvious lie. Patricia Walsh was staring at him with a mixture of horror and fury, clearly understanding that her firm's reputation was being destroyed in real time. Furthermore, Marcus continued relentlessly. Our investigation shows a pattern of financial irregularities that extends beyond just inappropriate expense reports. Tyler has been systematically overbilling clients for services not rendered, padding project hours to inflate invoices, and creating phantom expenses to justify higher fees. Gerald stepped closer to Tyler, his face reflecting a growing understanding of the situation's severity. "Son, what have you done?" "I didn't steal anything," Tyler said frantically. "Every charge was approved through proper channels. If there were mistakes in the billing system, that's a company problem, not a personal one." Marcus's expression grew colder. Actually, Tyler falsifying business records and defrauding clients constitutes wire fraud and embezzlement under federal law. These aren't billing mistakes, they're felony crimes. The words hit the room like a bombshell. Patricia Walsh sank into the nearest chair, her professional world collapsing around her. The other guests began edging toward the exits, clearly uncomfortable witnessing what was becoming a criminal matter. "But here's what's particularly interesting," Marcus said, his voice taking on a more personal edge. "The pattern of Tyler's financial crimes exactly matches the methodology used by Vincent Morrison at Dataflow Industries 3 years ago. Almost as if Tyler learned from studying that case and decided to implement similar techniques." I felt pieces clicking together in my mind as Marcus spoke. "You used my work," I said quietly, staring at Tyler with dawning comprehension. "You used the analysis I did of Vincent Morrison's embezzlement to design your own scheme." Tyler's silence was answer enough. His face had gone gray and his hands shook as he gripped the edge of a nearby table for support. "That's why you were so interested in the details of the Dataflow case," Gerald said slowly, his voice heavy with disappointment. "You kept asking Judith about the investigation techniques, the way Morrison had hidden the money transfers." "I was curious about her work," Tyler mumbled, but his protest lacked any conviction. Marcus nodded grimly. Tyler had access to Judith's analysis through family conversations, and he used that knowledge to construct his own fraud scheme. He assumed that smaller amounts spread across multiple clients would be harder to detect than Morrison's concentrated approach. "But you caught him," I said, pieces still falling into place. "We caught him because we knew what to look for. Judith's original analysis at Dataflow became the template for our ongoing fraud detection protocols. When we saw similar patterns in Henderson's billing records, we immediately flagged them for investigation." The irony was stunning and horrible. Tyler had used my work to design his crimes, but that same work had provided the tools for his detection. His attempt to profit from my analysis had become the instrument of his downfall. Patricia Walsh found her voice, though it came out strained and shaky. "How much money are we talking about?" Marcus consulted his documents. "Our preliminary investigation suggests Tyler diverted approximately $47,000 over 8 months through various fraudulent billing practices. However, the full scope won't be clear until a complete audit is conducted." $47,000, Gerald repeated numbly. "That we've found so far," Marcus clarified. "The investigation is ongoing and we expect to discover additional irregularities as we examine more client accounts." Tyler finally spoke, his voice barely audible. "I can pay it back, with interest. It was never about stealing. I was just trying to cover some temporary financial problems." "Temporary financial problems?" Marcus asked. "What kind of financial problems require embezzling money from clients?" Tyler's eyes darted toward Gerald, a look passing between them that I didn't understand but Marcus clearly caught. "There's something else, isn't there?" Marcus pressed. "Some underlying financial pressure that drove Tyler to risk his career and freedom for $47,000. Gerald shifted uncomfortably, his gaze dropping to the floor. Tyler's desperation deepened, and I could see him wrestling with how much to reveal. "It's personal family business," Tyler said finally. "Nothing that affects Henderson and Associates or Dataflow." "Actually," Marcus replied calmly, "given that Tyler's personal financial pressures apparently drove him to commit crimes that directly affect both our companies, I'd say it's very much our business now." The standoff stretched taut as Tyler and Gerald exchanged increasingly panicked glances. Whatever secret they were protecting was clearly significant enough to drive Tyler to embezzlement, and Marcus wasn't going to let them keep it hidden. Patricia Walsh stood up slowly, her professional instincts finally overriding her shock. "Tyler, I think you need to contact an attorney, and Mr. Hamilton Henderson and Associates will cooperate fully with any investigation. We had no knowledge of these irregularities and will take immediate action to address them." "I appreciate that," Marcus said, though his attention remained focused on Tyler and Gerald. "However, I suspect we're only seeing the tip of the iceberg. Tyler's financial crimes are likely symptoms of a much larger problem." He was right, and as I watched my father and brother exchange desperate looks, I realized that the devastating revelations of tonight were far from over. Gerald's composure finally shattered under Marcus's relentless scrutiny. His weathered hands trembled as he reached for his abandoned champagne glass, draining what remained in a single gulp that did nothing to steady his nerves. "This has gone far enough," he said, his voice hoarse with strain. "Tyler made some poor financial decisions, but there's no need to drag family matters into a business discussion." Marcus studied Gerald with the same analytical intensity he'd directed at Tyler. "Mr. Parker, your son, embezzled money from clients to solve what he called temporary financial problems. Those problems don't exist in a vacuum. They have causes, and those causes are relevant to understanding the scope of potential criminal activity. You're destroying our family over business nonsense." Gerald snapped, his defensive anger flaring despite the precarious situation. "Tyler's a good boy who got in over his head. This public humiliation serves no purpose except to satisfy your corporate ego." The accusation hung in the air like a challenge. Several guests shifted uncomfortably, clearly debating whether to leave entirely or stay to witness the conclusion of this family catastrophe. But Gerald's attack triggered something in me that I hadn't expected. For years, I'd absorbed his criticism, his disappointment, his subtle undermining of my confidence. I'd accepted his version of events, believed his explanations for why my career struggles were somehow my fault. "Stop," I said quietly, stepping between Marcus and Gerald. "Just stop protecting him." "Judith, honey, this isn't the time for family therapy," Gerald said, his tone patronizing in the way that had always made me feel small. "No, Dad, this is exactly the time." My voice grew stronger as years of suppressed frustration found their outlet. "Tyler didn't develop financial problems in a vacuum. He's been covering your gambling debts for the past 2 years. The room went silent except for the soft jazz music still playing in the background. Gerald's face went white, while Tyler looked like he wanted to disappear entirely. "That's enough," Gerald warned, but his voice lacked conviction. "Is it—" I turned to address the room, my anger finally finding its target. "You want to know why Tyler felt pressured to steal money? Because our father has a gambling addiction that's been destroying our family finances for years." Patricia Walsh and the other guests exchanged horrified glances. This had moved far beyond professional misconduct into deeply personal territory that none of them wanted to witness. "Judith, please," Tyler whispered desperately. But I was done protecting family secrets that had enabled Gerald's destructive behavior while sabotaging my own future. Tyler took out enormous student loans because Dad gambled away his college fund. Then Dad started borrowing money from Tyler after graduation, promising to pay it back, but never following through. Gerald's defensive mask slipped entirely. I had some setbacks, some bad luck with investments. Investments? I laughed bitterly. Is that what we're calling poker games and sports betting now, Dad? You've lost over $60,000 in the past 2 years alone. Marcus's expression shifted as he processed this new information. Tyler has been embezzling money to cover gambling debts. Not just Tyler's debts. I continued the words spilling out like water through a broken dam. Dad convinced him that family loyalty meant protecting the Parker name from scandal. Tyler's been making payments to bookies and covering bounce checks while Dad promised to get help and stop gambling. Gerald's shoulders sagged as the truth emerged. It's not as simple as Judith makes it sound. I had some temporary financial difficulties, and Tyler was helping bridge the gap until my situation improved. Your situation never improved because you never stopped gambling, I shot back. And Tyler was too ashamed to admit that his perfect father had a serious addiction, so he enabled it by stealing money from clients. Tyler finally found his voice, though it came out cracked and desperate. I thought I could manage it temporarily. Dad promised he was getting treatment, and I believed I could cover the debts until he got back on his feet. How much? Marcus asked quietly. Tyler and Gerald exchanged glances before Tyler answered reluctantly. About $35,000 over 18 months. The embezzled money from Henderson's clients was meant to make the final payments and get us clear. $35,000 in gambling debts, Marcus repeated slowly. That's what drove you to risk your career, your freedom, and your family's reputation. Gerald's face flushed with shame and anger. I never asked Tyler to steal anything. I thought he was using savings or taking a loan. You didn't ask where he was getting thousands of dollars in cash, I asked incredulously. You didn't wonder how a junior marketing associate could afford to bail you out repeatedly. I assumed he was being resourceful, Gerald mumbled, but even he seemed to realize how weak that sounded. Marcus closed his portfolio and looked around the room at the shattered remains of what had begun as a promotion celebration. This explains the financial pressure, but it doesn't excuse the criminal behavior. Tyler chose to commit fraud rather than seek legitimate help for his father's addiction. What would you have done? Tyler asked desperately. Let my father get beaten up by loan sharks, watch our family name get destroyed by scandal. I would have gotten him professional help and let him face the natural consequences of his choices, Marcus replied firmly. Instead, you enabled his addiction while creating new victims through your crimes. Patricia Walsh finally spoke up, her voice professionally controlled despite her obvious distress. Tyler, I'm placing you on immediate suspension pending a full investigation. You'll need to surrender your company credit cards and access badges tonight. The reality of his situation seemed to hit Tyler all at once. His career was over, criminal charges were likely, and his attempt to protect his father had only made everything worse. But there's more to this story, I said, my anger still burning bright. Dad, tell them about the college recommendations. Gerald's face went ashen. Judith, that's ancient history. Tell them how you took credit for my academic achievements during college, how you told relatives and family friends that I was struggling academically while you attended my award ceremonies and graduation, as if you were responsible for my success. Marcus raised an eyebrow. You claimed credit for Judith's academic performance. I supported her education, Gerald said defensively. I had a right to be proud of her accomplishments. You told everyone that I was barely passing my classes while you were helping me stay focused, I continued relentlessly. But you knew I was graduating summa cum laude with a 4.0 GPA. You attended the honors banquet where I received the Outstanding Student Award in Business Ethics. The irony wasn't lost on anyone in the room. Gerald had claimed credit for academic achievements in business ethics while enabling gambling addiction and financial fraud. Why? Marcus asked, his curiosity genuine. Why misrepresent your daughter's academic success? Gerald's answer came out barely audible. Because if people knew how smart she was, they'd wonder why I wasn't more successful myself. The confession hung in the air like an indictment of everything wrong with our family dynamic. Gerald's insecurity had driven him to diminish my achievements while inflating his own role in my life. Tyler's competitive jealousy had led him to sabotage my career while stealing money to protect Gerald's reputation. And I had enabled it all by staying silent, by protecting their secrets, by accepting blame for their failures. This family is built on lies, I said quietly, the words carrying clearly across the silent room. Lies about success, lies about failure, lies about who we really are and what we're capable of achieving. Marcus nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. Judith, I need to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before answering. What is it? Have you been financially supporting Gerald's gambling addiction as well? The question hit like a physical blow, forcing me to confront the truth I'd been avoiding for months. Yes, I whispered. I've been making payments on 2 of his credit cards for the past year. Tyler's head snapped up. Well, you never told me that. Because you had enough pressure without knowing that I was struggling to keep up with Dad's debts while dealing with my own employment problems, I replied. I thought if I could just cover the minimum payments until I found stable work, we could get through this without anyone else getting hurt. Marcus's expression grew grim. How much have you paid toward Gerald's gambling debts? About $18,000 since last January? The numbers seemed to echo in the sudden silence. Between Tyler's embezzlement and my payments, Gerald's addiction had cost our family over $50,000 and destroyed both our careers. $53,000, Marcus said quietly. That's how much damage one person's gambling addiction has caused. Tyler faces criminal charges, Judith has been financially devastated, and Gerald has escaped consequences while his family destroyed themselves to protect him. Gerald finally broke down completely, tears streaming down his face as the magnitude of what he'd done to his children became clear. I never meant for any of this to happen. I thought I could control it, thought I could win back what I'd lost. But you couldn't, Marcus said simply, and now your children have paid the price for your addiction while you continued gambling with money they provided. The truth was finally out, ugly and devastating, but undeniable. Our family's dysfunction had been laid bare in front of strangers, and there was no going back to the carefully maintained pretense of normalcy we'd constructed over the years. But as painful as this exposure was, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: relief. The secrets were finally in the open, and for the first time in years, I didn't have to pretend that everything was fine. As Gerald's tears continued to fall, the full scope of the financial devastation became clear in ways that even I hadn't fully understood. Marcus pulled out his phone and began making notes, his expression growing darker with each revelation. Gerald, he said firmly, I need you to be completely honest with me now. How much do you currently owe to creditors, bookies, and loan sharks? Gerald wiped his eyes with a napkin, his hands still shaking. I don't know exactly. The numbers keep changing with interest and penalties. Give me your best estimate. Maybe $25,000 in active debts, plus the money Tyler and Judith have already paid. Gerald's voice trailed off as he realized the magnitude of the combined losses. Patricia Walsh had been listening with growing horror, clearly understanding that her company was now connected to a much larger financial crisis than Tyler's embezzlement alone. Mr. Hamilton Henderson and Associates had no knowledge of any of these personal financial issues. Tyler's employment application and background check showed no red flags. I understand that, Marcus replied. But this situation raises serious questions about Tyler's ability to make sound business decisions when he's under severe financial pressure. It also suggests that his embezzlement may have been more extensive than our preliminary investigation revealed. The implications sent a fresh wave of panic across Tyler's face. I told you exactly how much I took. There's nothing else to find. Tyler, Marcus said patiently, you've been lying systematically for months about your family's situation, your sister's career, and your own financial activities. Forgive me if I don't take your word for the complete scope of your crimes. Patricia Walsh stood up and walked to the window, her phone already in hand. I'm calling our corporate attorney. This situation is beyond what our HR department can handle internally. As she moved away to make her call, Marcus turned his attention back to our family's financial disaster. Judith, you mentioned that you've been paying Gerald's credit card minimums. Are there other debts you're aware of? I thought carefully, trying to inventory the various requests for money that had come from Gerald over the past year. He's behind on his car payment, his homeowner's insurance lapsed last month, and I know he owes money to at least 3 different people he describes as business associates. Business associates who are probably loan sharks, Marcus said grimly. Gerald's head shot up. They're not dangerous people. They're just friends who helped me out during a rough patch. Dad, Tyler said desperately, you told me the money I gave you was paying off the last of your debts. You said we were almost clear. We are almost clear, Gerald insisted weakly. Once the current obligations are met, I won't need any more help. That's what you said 6 months ago, I pointed out. And 8 months before that. Every time we think we're caught up, there's another emergency, another debt that somehow got overlooked. Marcus was taking notes on his phone, clearly building a comprehensive picture of the financial mess. Gerald, when was the last time you placed a bet or gambled in any form? The question hung in the air for a long moment before Gerald answered reluctantly. Last Tuesday. Last Tuesday, Marcus repeated flatly. 5 days ago. You were still gambling while your children were destroying their lives to pay your debts. Gerald's face crumpled. It was just a small bet on a basketball game. I thought if I could win a little money, I could reduce the pressure on Tyler and Judith. How much did you lose? $800. The number hit Tyler like a physical blow. $800, Dad. I just paid $1,500 to your business associate 2 weeks ago. You told me that cleared your outstanding debts. It did clear some of them, Gerald protested. But there were additional expenses and I thought I could win back enough to handle everything myself. I felt sick as the pattern became clear. While Tyler and I had been sacrificing everything to bail Gerald out, he'd been continuing to gamble, creating new debts as fast as we could pay off old ones. Our efforts hadn't been helping him recover. They'd been enabling his addiction to continue unchecked. This is why intervention programs exist, Marcus said quietly. Gerald, your family's attempts to protect you from consequences have actually made your addiction worse. You've had no incentive to stop gambling because Tyler and Judith absorbed all the financial pain. Gerald's defensive anger flared briefly. I'm a grown man capable of making my own decisions. I don't need lectures about my personal choices from someone who doesn't know our family situation. Your personal choices have driven your son to commit federal crimes, Marcus replied calmly. They're no longer purely personal when they create victims and destroy other people's lives. Patricia Walsh returned from her phone call, her expression grim. Our attorney is on his way. He's also contacting the district attorney's office to discuss potential criminal charges. Tyler, you have the right to remain silent and to contact your own attorney. The legal reality of the situation settled over Tyler like a death sentence. He sank into the nearest chair, his face gray with the understanding that his life as he knew it was over. There's something else we need to discuss, Marcus said, his voice taking on an even more serious tone. Gerald, have any of these business associates made threats about collecting their money? Gerald's hesitation was answer enough. Dad, I asked, ice forming in my stomach. Nothing serious, Gerald said quickly. Just the usual pressure that comes with overdue payments. They're businessmen. They want their money back, that's all. Tyler looked up sharply. What kind of pressure? You didn't tell me anyone was threatening you. Because I didn't want you to worry, Gerald replied. I can handle my own problems. Clearly you can't, Marcus said bluntly. What kind of threats have you received? Gerald squirmed under the scrutiny before answering reluctantly. Some phone calls about payment schedules, a couple of visits to discuss extending deadlines. Nothing out of the ordinary for business relationships. Visits, I repeated, my voice rising. People came to your house. Just to talk business, Gerald insisted, but his tone suggested otherwise. Marcus's expression grew darker. Gerald, if you owe money to illegal gambling operations and they're making collection visits, you've put your entire family at risk. These aren't legitimate creditors who work through the court system. The implications of what Marcus was saying hit me all at once. Tyler's embezzlement wasn't just about protecting our family's reputation, it was potentially about protecting our physical safety. If Gerald owed money to dangerous people, his children might face consequences for his debts. How much do you owe to these business associates specifically? Marcus asked. Maybe $12,000, Gerald mumbled. Maybe 12,000 or exactly 12,000, Marcus pressed. $14,300 as of last week, Gerald admitted finally. But they're reasonable people. They understand that collection takes time. Tyler made a choking sound. $14,000 to loan sharks. Dad, you told me you owed $5,000 to cover everything. The amount increased due to interest and late fees, Gerald said defensively. This is why you were so desperate to steal more money, I said to Tyler, understanding finally dawning. You weren't just covering Dad's gambling debts, you were trying to pay off dangerous people who might hurt him. Tyler nodded miserably. The deadline for the final payment is next Friday. If I don't come up with the money, they said Dad would face serious consequences. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, clearly processing the full scope of the crisis. Gerald's gambling addiction had created a situation where his son felt compelled to commit crimes to prevent potential violence against his father. Tyler. Marcus said finally, you need to understand that paying criminals with embezzled money doesn't solve the problem. It creates new problems. If these loan sharks discover that their payment came from stolen funds, it could put your entire family in even greater danger. The color drained from Tyler's face as he realized the additional complications his crimes might have created. He'd been so focused on meeting the payment deadline that he hadn't considered the potential consequences of using fraudulent money to pay illegal debts. What do we do now? Tyler asked quietly, his voice barely audible above the restaurant's background music. Marcus looked around the room at the wreckage of our family gathering before answering. Now we call the FBI. Marcus's declaration that we needed to call the FBI sent shockwaves through the remaining guests. Janet Rodriguez immediately gathered her purse and headed for the exit, clearly wanting no part of whatever was about to unfold. Bill Thompson followed her, whispering hurried apologies to Patricia Walsh as he departed. The FBI, Gerald repeated weakly. Surely that's an overreaction. This is a family matter that can be resolved privately. Mr. Parker. Marcus replied with deadly calm, your son embezzled money from corporate clients to pay gambling debts to what may be organized crime figures. This stopped being a private family matter the moment it crossed into federal jurisdiction. Patricia Walsh returned from another phone call, her face pale but determined. Our corporate attorney will be here within 20 minutes. He's also arranging for an emergency audit of all accounts managed by Tyler over the past year. Tyler looked like he might be sick. An audit of all my accounts. That's not necessary. I told you exactly what I took. Tyler. Marcus said patiently, you've lied about literally everything else tonight. Why would I trust your word about the scope of your embezzlement? While Marcus made his own phone calls, I found myself studying Gerald with new eyes, seeing patterns of behavior that I'd previously dismissed or rationalized. His expensive clothing despite his supposed financial difficulties, his confident demeanor when discussing business opportunities that never materialized, his ability to maintain his lifestyle while supposedly struggling with debt. Dad, I said quietly, how have you been paying for your regular expenses while Tyler and I covered your gambling debts? Gerald's eyes darted around the room as if looking for an escape route. I manage my finances carefully. I prioritize essential expenses. That's not an answer, I pressed. Your mortgage, your car payment, your credit cards for normal purchases. Where's that money coming from? Marcus finished his phone call and turned his attention back to our conversation. That's an excellent question, Judith. Gerald, do you have legitimate income sources beyond whatever support Tyler and Judith have been providing? I have my pension from the city, Gerald said defensively, plus some consulting work and investment income. Consulting work in what field? Marcus asked. Gerald hesitated before answering. I help people with financial planning and investment strategies. The silence that followed was heavy with implication. Tyler's head snapped up, his expression horrifying as understanding dawned. Financial planning, Marcus repeated slowly. Gerald, please tell me you haven't been taking money from other people for investment advice. It's legitimate consulting, Gerald insisted, but his voice lacked conviction. "I have years of experience in municipal finance." "Dad," Tyler said urgently, "what kind of consulting? Who are your clients?" Gerald's defensive mask slipped further. "Mostly elderly people who need help managing their retirement funds and Social Security benefits. They pay me to handle their investment decisions and maximize their returns." My blood turned to ice water as I realized what Gerald was describing. "You're taking money from senior citizens to gamble with—" "I'm providing professional financial services," Gerald protested weakly. Marcus was already dialing another number on his phone. "This keeps getting worse. Gerald, how much money are you currently managing for these elderly clients?" "It's not a large amount, maybe $40,000 or $50,000 total across 6 clients. $40,000 or $50,000 of other people's retirement money," Marcus said grimly. "And where is that money now?" Gerald's silence was answer enough. Tyler buried his face in his hands. "Oh God, Dad, please tell me you didn't gamble away their retirement funds." "I invested it in high-yield opportunities," Gerald said desperately. "There were some temporary setbacks, but the returns will compensate for any short-term losses. High-yield opportunities like poker games and sports betting." I said, my voice flat with shock. Marcus finished his call and returned his attention to Gerald with laser focus. "How much of your client's money have you lost gambling?" "About $38,000, Gerald whispered. "But I'm working on a recovery strategy." Patricia Walsh looked physically ill. This man has been stealing from senior citizens to fund his gambling addiction, while his children committed crimes to protect him. The scope of Gerald's destruction was staggering. Not only had he driven Tyler to embezzlement and me to financial ruin, but he'd also betrayed the trust of elderly people who'd relied on him to protect their life savings. Gerald, Marcus said quietly, "You've committed elder abuse investment fraud and possibly dozens of other felonies. The FBI isn't just going to investigate Tyler's embezzlement, they're going to investigate you." Within 30 minutes, the private dining room at Santino's Bistro had been transformed into an impromptu command center for multiple investigations. Henderson and Associates corporate attorney, Michael Stevens, arrived with a team of forensic accountants. Marcus's contact at the FBI special agent Rebecca Chen appeared with documentation specialists and financial crimes investigators. Agent Chen was a serious woman in her 40s with sharp eyes that seemed to catalog every detail of the scene. She interviewed Tyler, Gerald, and me separately while her team began securing evidence and documenting the scope of the various crimes. Tyler's interview was devastating. Under professional questioning, he admitted to embezzling $53,000 over 10 months, far more than his original estimate. The additional thefts had been carefully concealed through sophisticated accounting manipulations that demonstrated premeditation rather than desperate improvisation. Gerald's interview revealed an even more extensive criminal enterprise. His consulting business was actually a predatory scheme targeting isolated elderly people through his social connections at the senior center where he volunteered. He'd convinced 6 victims to turn over control of their retirement accounts, promising guaranteed returns that he'd gambled away entirely. When my turn came, Agent Chen's questions were thorough but sympathetic. She seemed to understand that I'd been a victim of family manipulation rather than a willing participant in any criminal activity. "Ms. Parker," she said during our private conversation, "I need to ask you directly. Did you know that the money you gave your father was being used to gamble rather than pay legitimate debts?" "I suspected it," I admitted, "but I wanted to believe his promises that he was getting help and stopping the gambling. I thought if I could just help him get current on his debts, he'd have a fresh start." "And did you know about his financial consulting business?" "Not until tonight. He told me he was doing some part-time work, but I thought it was legitimate employment." Agent Chen nodded sympathetically. "You've been supporting what you believed were efforts to help your father overcome addiction, but he was actually using your support to enable continued gambling while victimizing elderly people." The reality of my situation was both relieving and heartbreaking. I wasn't criminally liable for Gerald's actions, but I'd been unknowingly funding a criminal enterprise while destroying my own financial stability. "There's one more thing I need to discuss with you," Agent Chen said. "The money your father owes to loan sharks represents a potential safety threat to your entire family. We're going to recommend that you consider relocating temporarily while we investigate those connections." The suggestion that I might need to flee my home because of Gerald's choices was the final blow to any remaining family loyalty I felt. He'd not only destroyed my career and finances, he'd put my physical safety at risk. As the evening progressed, the full scope of the investigations became clear. Tyler would face federal charges for embezzlement and wire fraud. Gerald would be charged with elder abuse investment fraud and numerous other felonies. Henderson and Associates would undergo a complete audit to determine if other employees had engaged in similar misconduct. And I would finally be free from the family obligations that had been destroying my life while protecting the people who'd betrayed me most deeply. Marcus found me during a break in the interviews, his expression concerned but not pitying. "How are you holding up?" "Honestly, I feel liberated," I said, surprising myself with the truth of that statement. For the first time in years, I don't have to protect secrets or make excuses for their behavior. "The FBI agent mentioned that you might need to relocate for safety reasons." I nodded. Gerald's loan shark friends might not understand that I didn't know where their money was really coming from. Marcus was quiet for a moment before speaking carefully. "Judith, I meant what I said earlier about the position at Dataflow. That offer stands regardless of what happens with your family's legal situation. Even though my brother embezzled money and my father is a predatory criminal, your brother and father made their own choices. You consistently chose integrity over family loyalty, often at significant personal cost. That's exactly the kind of character I want in someone responsible for corporate ethics." His words were like a lifeline thrown to someone drowning in years of guilt and self-doubt. For the first time since this nightmare evening began, I allowed myself to believe that my future might be brighter than my past. "Thank you," I said simply. "I'd like to accept that position." Marcus smiled, and I realized that sometimes the worst nights of our lives create space for the best opportunities we'll ever receive. The next few hours unfolded like a carefully choreographed disaster, with each revelation triggering new investigations and consequences that rippled outward from our shattered family gathering. Patricia Walsh spent most of the evening on conference calls with Henderson and Associates executive team, her voice growing more strained with each conversation. By 10:30 that night, Tyler had been formally terminated and escorted from the premises by building security. His company credit card's access badges and laptop were confiscated, while Agent Chen documented everything as potential evidence. The promotion celebration had become a termination proceeding, witnessed by the few colleagues who'd remained to watch the aftermath. Tyler Parker's employment with Henderson and Associates is terminated effective immediately, Patricia announced to the room. "We're cooperating fully with federal investigators and conducting our own internal audit to determine the full scope of any misconduct." Tyler sat slumped in his chair, the reality of his situation finally sinking in completely. Not only had he lost his job and faced criminal charges, but his professional reputation was destroyed beyond repair. Word of his embezzlement would spread through the marketing industry within days, ensuring that he'd never work in corporate America again. Gerald's situation was even worse. Agent Chen had contacted the district attorney's office about filing charges for elder abuse and investment fraud. The 6 elderly victims of his financial consulting scheme would need to be interviewed and their losses documented. Some of them might never recover the retirement funds they'd trusted him to protect. "Mr. Parker," Agent Chen addressed Gerald directly, "you'll need to provide complete records of all client accounts, investment transactions, and gambling activities over the past 2 years. Failure to cooperate fully will result in additional charges for obstruction of justice." Gerald nodded weakly, his earlier defiance replaced by resigned acceptance of his fate. The man who'd spent years lecturing Tyler and me about personal responsibility was finally facing consequences for his own choices. But the most shocking revelation came when Agent Chen received a phone call that made her expression grow even more serious than before. "Mr. Hamilton," she said after ending the call, "our preliminary investigation of Tyler's embezzlement has uncovered additional irregularities that extend beyond Henderson and Associates." Marcus looked up from his own phone where he'd been coordinating with Dataflow's legal team. "What kind of irregularities?" "Tyler appears to have been submitting fraudulent expense reports to multiple companies over the past year. We found evidence of billing the same expenses to Henderson Dataflow and at least 3 other potential clients." The room fell silent as the implications became clear. Tyler hadn't just been embezzling from his employer, he'd been running a sophisticated multi-company fraud scheme that multiplied his crimes exponentially. Tyler's face went white. "That's not possible. I only worked for Henderson." "But Henderson was pursuing contracts with multiple companies," Agent Chen replied. "You submitted preliminary expense reports for business development activities with several potential clients, billing each company for overlapping costs." Patricia Walsh looked sick. "Tyler, please tell me you didn't bill our potential clients for the same fake expenses you billed Henderson." Tyler's silence was answer enough. His embezzlement scheme was far more extensive and sophisticated than anyone had realized, potentially involving 6 different companies and hundreds of thousands of dollars in fraudulent billings. Michael Stevens, Henderson's attorney, closed his laptop with a sharp snap. "This changes everything. We're not just dealing with employee embezzlement. We're dealing with systematic business fraud that could expose Henderson and Associates to massive liability." "How is Henderson liable for Tyler's personal crimes?" I asked. "If Tyler defrauded other companies while representing Henderson's interests, those companies could claim that we enabled or should have detected his criminal activity," Stevens explained grimly. "Our professional liability insurance might not cover losses from employee criminal activity." The domino effect was accelerating. Tyler's crimes weren't just destroying his own life, they were threatening the financial stability of his former employer and potentially affecting dozens of other people's jobs. Marcus received another phone call and stepped away briefly before returning with an expression I couldn't read. "That was our forensic accounting firm. They've completed their preliminary analysis of Tyler's expense reports and billing records." And Agent Chen asked, "Tyler submitted fraudulent bills totaling $137,000 across 6 different companies over 14 months. He's been running this scheme since shortly after he started at Henderson." The number hit like a physical blow. Tyler hadn't been driven to crime by Gerald's gambling crisis. He'd been systematically stealing from multiple companies while using Gerald's situation as cover for his activities. $137,000. Patricia Walsh repeated numbly. "Tyler, how could you possibly spend that much money?" Tyler finally found his voice, though it came out barely above a whisper. "It started small, just padding a few expense reports to cover Dad's debts. But once I realized how easy it was to bill multiple companies for the same costs, it became a way to build savings while helping the family." "Build savings?" Marcus asked incredulously. "I opened investment accounts with the excess money. I thought if I could generate enough returns, I could pay back what I'd taken and still have money left over for Dad's debts." The admission revealed yet another layer of Tyler's self-deception. He'd convinced himself that his systematic fraud was actually a sophisticated investment strategy that would benefit everyone involved. Agent Chen made notes while shaking her head. "Tyler investment fraud is another federal crime. If you've been using embezzled money to trade stocks or other securities, you've violated additional statutes." Tyler's remaining composure cracked completely. "I was trying to fix everything. I thought if I could just make enough money through smart investments, I could solve all our family's problems without anyone getting hurt." "Except you were stealing money from 6 different companies while building your investment portfolio," Marcus pointed out. "The people whose money you stole were definitely getting hurt." As Tyler's complete criminal enterprise came to light, I found myself staring at a stranger. The brother I'd grown up with, who I'd defended and supported despite his cruelty, had been living a double life as a sophisticated white-collar criminal for over a year. "There's one more issue we need to address," Agent Chen said, consulting her notes. "Tyler, several of the companies you defrauded have already contacted law enforcement about suspicious billing practices. Your fraud scheme was beginning to unravel even before tonight's revelations." "What do you mean?" Tyler asked weakly. "Dataflow's accounting department flagged irregular expense patterns 3 weeks ago. Creative Solutions noticed duplicate billing across multiple potential vendors last month. You were already under investigation by at least 4 different companies." The final piece of the puzzle fell into place. Tyler's desperate rush to pay off Gerald's loan shark debts wasn't just about family loyalty. It was about trying to clean up his criminal activities before they were discovered by legitimate investigators. Marcus nodded grimly. "Tyler, your embezzlement scheme was collapsing whether you confess tonight or not. The difference is that tonight's confession might help you negotiate a better plea agreement." Patricia Walsh gathered her belongings with the defeated air of someone whose professional world had just collapsed. "Henderson and Associates will be dealing with the fallout from this disaster for years. Our reputation, our client relationships, our financial stability. Everything has been compromised by one employee's criminal activity." As she prepared to leave, she turned back to address Tyler directly. "I hope whatever you were trying to accomplish was worth destroying so many other people's lives." Tyler had no answer for her accusation because there was no answer that could justify the scope of his crimes or the breadth of their consequences. The evening that had begun as a celebration of Tyler's professional success had become a comprehensive destruction of multiple lives and careers. But as devastating as the revelations had been, I realized that the truth was finally out. And for the first time in years, I could see a path forward that didn't involve protecting people who'd been betraying me all along. 3 days after the disaster at Santino's Bistro, I sat in my cramped studio apartment, staring at a subpoena that had arrived via certified mail. The federal prosecutors wanted me to testify in Tyler's criminal case, and the weight of that responsibility felt heavier than anything I'd carried during the years of family crisis. My phone had been ringing constantly since news of the embezzlement scandal broke. Tyler called from jail every day, his voice desperate and pleading, as he begged me to help minimize the charges against him. Gerald, who'd been released on bail pending his own trial, left increasingly frantic voicemails about the importance of family loyalty and protecting our shared reputation. "Judith Honey." Gerald's latest message played from my answering machine. "We need to present a united front during these legal proceedings. The prosecutors are trying to destroy our family, but we can fight back if we stick together." The irony wasn't lost on me. For years, Gerald and Tyler had undermined my career and sabotaged my opportunities while demanding that I prioritize family unity above everything else. Now that their crimes had been exposed, they expected that same misguided loyalty to shield them from consequences. Marcus had visited twice since the FBI interviews, not to pressure me about my testimony, but to check on my well-being and discuss the logistics of starting work at Dataflow once the legal proceedings were resolved. His respect for my autonomy was refreshing after years of family members who'd treated my decisions as negotiable suggestions. "I want you to know," he'd said during his most recent visit, "that whatever you decide about testifying won't affect your position with Dataflow. Your professional value isn't contingent on helping us build a stronger criminal case against Tyler." His words had been kind, but they'd also highlighted the central conflict I was wrestling with. The federal prosecutors needed my testimony to establish the full scope of Tyler's crimes and prove that his embezzlement had been systematic rather than impulsive. My knowledge of Gerald's gambling addiction and Tyler's deliberate concealment of his financial problems was crucial evidence for establishing motive and premeditation. But testifying truthfully would ensure that both Tyler and Gerald faced maximum sentences for their crimes. Tyler was already looking at potential decades in federal prison for embezzlement, wire fraud, and investment fraud. Gerald faced similar sentences for elder abuse and financial crimes, targeting vulnerable seniors. The phone rang again, interrupting my troubled thoughts. This time it was Tyler calling collect from the county jail where he was being held pending trial. "Judith, thank God you answered." Tyler's voice came through the line, strained and hollow. "I've been trying to reach you for hours." "I know. I've been thinking about everything that's happened. Listen, I need you to understand something about my testimony next week. The prosecutors are going to ask you about Dad's gambling and my financial situation, but you don't have to tell them everything." The familiar pattern of manipulation made my stomach clench. Even from jail facing federal charges that could destroy his life, Tyler was still trying to control my choices and minimize his responsibility. "Tyler, they already know about Dad's gambling. The FBI has bank records, phone records, and witness statements. My testimony isn't going to change the evidence they've already gathered." "But you could frame it differently," Tyler pressed. "You could emphasize that I was trying to help family members, that my actions came from loyalty rather than greed." "Were they from loyalty?" I asked quietly. "Or were they from a pattern of dishonesty and manipulation that started long before Dad's gambling became a crisis?" Tyler was silent for a moment before responding with the kind of emotional manipulation that had worked on me for years. "Judith, I'm your brother. I know I made mistakes, but I'm still family. You have a choice here. You can help destroy what's left of our family, or you can help us get through this crisis together." The choice he was presenting was false, designed to make me feel guilty for considering honesty over loyalty. But I'd learned enough about healthy boundaries during my conversations with Marcus and the FBI victim advocate to recognize the manipulation for what it was. "Tyler, you destroyed our family when you chose to steal money and sabotage my career for 3 years. I didn't create this situation. You did. But you can influence how it ends," Tyler continued desperately. "If you testify that I was under extreme pressure because of Dad's gambling, that I was trying to protect our family from dangerous people, the jury might be more sympathetic. And if I testify truthfully about how you intercepted job offers and spread rumors about my professional reputation, how you used my analysis of the data flow embezzlement case to design your own fraud scheme, how you lied to me about Dad's debt levels to manipulate me into giving you money." Tyler's silence stretched long enough that I wondered if the call had been disconnected. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a desperation I'd never heard before. "Judith, please, I'm begging you. I know I hurt you, but I'm still your brother. If you testify against me, I could spend the rest of my life in prison." The pain in his voice was genuine, and for a moment I felt the old familiar tug of family obligation. Tyler was facing consequences that would destroy any chance he had for a normal future, and my testimony could significantly impact his sentence. But then I remembered the promotion party, the humiliating toast about stripping the years of undermined confidence and sabotaged opportunities. I thought about the elderly people Gerald had defrauded the companies Tyler had stolen from, and the pattern of choices that had prioritized their comfort over everyone else's well-being. "Tyler," I said carefully, "you spent 3 years actively sabotaging my career because you were afraid my success would make your shortcuts look bad. You stole over $100,000 from 6 different companies while convincing me that you were struggling to help Dad. You used my own work against me while pretending to be concerned about my welfare." "I know I made mistakes." "These weren't mistakes," I interrupted. "They were deliberate, systematic choices to prioritize your advancement over everyone else's welfare. You didn't just hurt me. You hurt Gerald's elderly victims, the companies you stole from, and your colleagues at Henderson who might lose their jobs because of the investigation." Tyler's breathing was audible through the phone line as he processed my words. When he spoke again, his voice had changed, becoming colder and more manipulative. "So you're going to destroy your own family to impress your new boss. You're choosing Marcus Hamilton over your own blood." The accusation was designed to make me feel ashamed of my decision, but instead it clarified my thinking with startling precision. Tyler was still trying to control my choices by making me feel guilty for prioritizing ethics over family loyalty. "I'm choosing honesty over enabling," I replied firmly. "I'm choosing integrity over protecting people who've betrayed that trust repeatedly." "Judith, think about what you're saying. If you testify against us, there's no going back. Our relationship as siblings will be over forever." The threat was Tyler's final attempt at manipulation, and it backfired completely. The relationship he was threatening to end had been built on lies, manipulation, and my willingness to absorb blame for their failures. Losing that dynamic wasn't a threat. It was a liberation. "Tyler, our relationship as siblings ended when you decided to sabotage my career while stealing money to cover crimes. I'm not destroying our family by telling the truth. I'm refusing to participate in the lies that enabled your destruction of innocent people." Before Tyler could respond, I continued with a clarity that surprised me. "I'm going to testify truthfully about everything I know regarding your financial crimes and Gerald's gambling addiction. I'm going to tell the court about how you intercepted job offers and damaged my professional reputation. I'm going to explain how you used my data flow analysis to design your embezzlement scheme." "Judith, please." "And I'm going to do all of this because it's the right thing to do, regardless of how it affects my relationship with people who've never prioritized my well-being anyway." The silence that followed felt like the end of an era. For the first time in my adult life, I'd chosen my own ethical standards over family pressure, and the sense of relief was overwhelming. "I have to go," I said quietly. "I hope you use your time in prison to think about the choices that led you here." I hung up before Tyler could respond, then immediately called Marcus to let him know about my decision. "I'm going to testify truthfully about everything I told him. Tyler and Gerald need to face full consequences for their choices." Marcus's response was everything I'd hoped for. "I'm proud of you, Judith. That decision couldn't have been easy, but it's the right choice for everyone involved." For the first time in years, I felt like I was making decisions based on my own values rather than fear of disappointing family members who'd never shown me the same consideration. The federal prosecutors were delighted when I called to confirm my cooperation with their investigation. They scheduled additional interviews to prepare for my testimony and assured me that victim services would be available throughout the legal proceedings. As I prepared for bed that night, I reflected on the choice I'd made and the future it would create. Tyler and Gerald would face the full consequences of their crimes, but those consequences were the natural result of their own decisions. I would finally be free to build a life based on integrity and authentic relationships rather than protecting people who'd betrayed me. The family I was choosing to leave behind had been built on dysfunction and manipulation. The future I was choosing to embrace offered the possibility of genuine success and meaningful relationships built on mutual respect. For the first time in months, I slept peacefully, knowing that I'd chosen correctly even when that choice was difficult. My testimony in federal court 3 weeks later was both terrifying and liberating. The courthouse in downtown Federal Plaza was an imposing building with marble floors and soaring ceilings that seemed designed to emphasize the gravity of legal proceedings. I wore my navy blue interview suit and carried a folder containing copies of emails, bank statements, and other documentation that supported my testimony. Assistant District Attorney Maria Santos was a sharp woman in her 40s who'd specialized in white-collar crime prosecution for over a decade. She'd spent hours preparing me for the defense attorney's cross-examination, helping me understand how Tyler's lawyer would try to portray me as a vindictive sister, seeking revenge rather than a credible witness. "Remember," she'd advised during our final preparation session, "stick to the facts. Answer only what's asked. Don't elaborate or speculate. Your testimony is powerful because it's truthful, not because it's emotional." The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected from television shows with blonde wood paneling and burgundy carpet that muffled footsteps. Tyler sat at the defense table wearing an orange jumpsuit, his hair longer and his face gaunt from weeks in jail. He avoided making eye contact as I walked to the witness stand. Gerald sat in the gallery behind Tyler, his expression a mixture of anger and pleading as he watched me take the oath. Several FBI agents occupied the first row along with Marcus, who'd taken time from work to provide moral support during my testimony. My direct examination by ADA Santos covered the basic timeline of events: Tyler's interference with Dataflow's recruitment efforts, his sabotage of my professional reputation, Gerald's gambling addiction, and the family pressure to cover his debts, and Tyler's admission about using my Dataflow analysis to design his embezzlement scheme. Ms. Parker, Ada Santos asked, "Based on your conversations with your brother over the past 2 years, was his embezzlement driven by sudden financial pressure, or was it part of a longer pattern of dishonest behavior?" "Objection," Tyler's defense attorney interjected. "Calls for speculation about the defendant's mental state." "I'll rephrase," ADA Santos said smoothly. "Ms. Parker, did your brother ever explicitly tell you that he was using your financial fraud analysis from Dataflow to design his own embezzlement activities?" "Yes. During the FBI interviews, Tyler admitted that he'd studied my analysis of Vincent Morrison's embezzlement case and used similar methods to hide his theft from Henderson and Associates and their clients." Tyler's attorney, David Chen, was the expensive criminal defense specialist who'd been hired with money from Gerald's bail bond. During cross-examination, he tried repeatedly to portray my testimony as motivated by sibling rivalry rather than commitment to truth. "Ms. Parker," Chen asked, "isn't it true that you resented your brother's professional success while you struggled to maintain employment?" "I was disappointed that Tyler's success was built on lies and theft while he actively sabotaged my legitimate career opportunities," I replied calmly. "But you were jealous of his promotion, weren't you?" "I was hurt that his promotion celebration included publicly humiliating me in front of his colleagues." Chen pressed harder, trying to rattle my composure. "Isn't your testimony here today motivated by a desire for revenge against your brother for embarrassing you at his party?" The question was designed to make me defensive, but my preparation with ADA Santos had anticipated this attack. "My testimony is motivated by a desire to tell the truth about systematic criminal activity that harmed multiple innocent victims." "But you're not exactly an innocent victim yourself, are you?" Chen continued. "You provided money to your father knowing it might be used for gambling." "I provided money believing it was being used to pay legitimate debts. When I learned it was funding continued gambling, I stopped providing financial support." Chen's cross-examination continued for nearly 2 hours, but he couldn't shake my testimony because it was based on documented facts rather than emotions or speculation. Tyler's own admissions during the FBI interviews had provided the foundation for most of my testimony, making it impossible to discredit through character attacks. When I finally stepped down from the witness stand, I felt emotionally drained but professionally vindicated. The truth about Tyler's crimes and Gerald's manipulation was finally part of the legal record documented under oath and subject to criminal penalties if proven false. The trial concluded 2 days later with Tyler's conviction on all 14 federal charges. The judge sentenced him to 8 years in federal prison, noting that his systematic fraud across multiple companies demonstrated sophisticated criminal planning rather than impulsive desperation. Gerald's separate trial resulted in a 6-year sentence for elder abuse and investment fraud, with additional restitution requirements for his elderly victims. Both men would serve their sentences in federal facilities, and both would emerge from prison with criminal records that would prevent them from ever working in financial services again. But the most significant development came 3 days after Tyler's sentencing, when Marcus called to ask if I could start work at Dataflow immediately, rather than waiting for the conclusion of all legal proceedings. "We've had 2 major ethics violations reported by employees this week," he explained. "It's clear that Dataflow needs a full-time ethics director immediately, and frankly, your testimony in Tyler's trial has convinced our board that you're exactly the right person for this role." Starting work at Dataflow felt like stepping into a parallel universe where competence was valued over politics and integrity was considered a professional asset rather than a liability. My office was on the 15th floor with a view of the city skyline, and my staff included 3 investigators and 2 compliance specialists who'd been waiting months for leadership. The ethics cases that had prompted Marcus's call were complex but fascinating challenges. The first involved a sales manager who'd been accepting expensive gifts from vendors in exchange for preferential treatment during contract negotiations. The second involved a software development team that had discovered security vulnerabilities in a competitor's products and was debating whether to disclose those vulnerabilities publicly. Working through these cases reminded me why I'd chosen business ethics as my specialization in graduate school. The intersection of moral principles and practical business decisions required analytical thinking, creative problem solving, and the courage to recommend difficult solutions when easy compromises would create larger problems. Within my first month at Dataflow, I'd implemented new reporting procedures that made it easier for employees to raise ethical concerns without fear of retaliation. I'd also established regular training programs to help managers recognize potential compliance issues before they became criminal matters. The most gratifying moment came when Marcus forwarded me an email from Morrison Tech's new CEO requesting a meeting to discuss their company's ethics program overhaul following their sexual harassment scandal. The company that had fired me for reporting Bradley Evans's misconduct now wanted my expertise to prevent similar problems in the future. "It seems that your reputation for integrity has spread throughout the business community," Marcus observed with a smile. "Morrison Tech isn't the only company that's reached out about consulting services." He was right. Within 6 weeks of starting at Dataflow, I'd received inquiries from Creative Solutions about implementing fraud detection protocols from Sterling Consulting, about audit integrity procedures, and from Bradford Marketing about diversity and inclusion compliance. The companies that had punished me for reporting their ethical violations now recognized that those same analytical skills could help them avoid future scandals and legal liability. My terminations from those companies had become professional credentials rather than career obstacles. "It's ironic," I told Marcus during one of our weekly check-in meetings. "Tyler spent 3 years trying to convince everyone that I was a problem employee who couldn't adapt to corporate culture. But the business community has decided that my refusal to compromise ethical standards is exactly what they need." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. Tyler was wrong about a lot of things, but he was especially wrong about the value of integrity in business. Companies are finally learning that ethical problems cost far more than ethical solutions. The financial impact of my work was becoming evident as well. The ethics program I designed was saving Dataflow approximately $200,000 annually in potential legal fees and regulatory fines. Other companies were implementing similar programs based on my consultation, creating a market for integrity-based business solutions that hadn't existed before Tyler's case made headlines. 6 months after Tyler's conviction, I received a call that marked the completion of my professional rehabilitation. "Ms. Parker, this is Jennifer Walsh from the National Business Ethics Association," the caller began. "We'd like to invite you to be our keynote speaker at this year's annual conference. Your work at Dataflow and your role in exposing the Henderson embezzlement case have made you something of a celebrity in our field." The invitation was both humbling and satisfying. Tyler's crimes had inadvertently created a platform for me to advocate for the ethical standards he'd violated. His attempt to destroy my reputation had ultimately established me as a national expert in business integrity. As I prepared my acceptance speech for the conference, I reflected on the journey that had brought me from Tyler's humiliating promotion party to professional recognition as an ethics expert. The path had been painful, but it had led to work that felt meaningful and relationships built on mutual respect rather than family obligation. Tyler and Gerald were serving their sentences in federal prison, hopefully learning from the consequences of their choices. I was building a career that aligned with my values while helping other people avoid the ethical pitfalls that had destroyed my family. For For the first time in my adult life, success and integrity weren't competing goals. They were complementary aspects of a life built on authentic principles rather than family dysfunction. The transformation was complete, but the real work was just beginning. The National Business Ethics Conference was held at the downtown Marriott in a ballroom that could seat 800 people. As I stood backstage, adjusting my microphone and reviewing my notes one final time, I could hardly believe that my journey from Tyler's humiliation to professional recognition had culminated in this moment. The conference organizers had titled my presentation, "From Whistleblower to Ethics Leader Building Integrity in Corporate America," and the early registration numbers suggested that my story had resonated throughout the business community. Companies were struggling to rebuild trust after numerous high-profile scandals, and they were looking for practical guidance from someone who'd actually lived through the challenges of maintaining ethics under pressure. Marcus had driven down from Dataflow to attend the presentation, along with several members of our board of directors who were curious to see how our ethics program was being received in the broader business community. The support meant more to me than I could express. Having professional colleagues who valued my work was still a relatively new experience. Ladies and gentlemen, the conference moderator announced, "Please welcome Dataflow Industries Director of Ethics and Compliance, Ms. Judith Parker." The applause was warm and sustained as I walked onto the stage, facing an audience that included CEOs, compliance officers, and ethics professionals from companies across the country. These were people who'd heard about Tyler's embezzlement case and my role in exposing systematic fraud, but they'd come to learn practical strategies rather than listen to personal drama. 3 years ago, I was a junior analyst who discovered embezzlement at my company and reported it to management. 2 years ago, I was an unemployed whistleblower who'd been fired from 4 companies for refusing to participate in unethical practices. Today, I'm standing here as evidence that integrity and success aren't mutually exclusive, even though it sometimes feels that way. The audience chuckled appreciatively, and I felt my nervousness fade as I settled into the presentation I'd spent weeks preparing. I walked them through the key elements of Dataflow's ethics program, anonymous reporting systems that actually protected whistleblowers' regular training, that addressed real-world ethical dilemmas, rather than theoretical scenarios, and management accountability measures that made ethics violations career-ending events for supervisors who ignored problems. The most important lesson I've learned, I continued, is that ethical problems don't fix themselves. They escalate until they become legal problems, public relations disasters, or both. The cost of addressing ethics violations early is always lower than the cost of dealing with their consequences later. During the question and answer session, the audience's questions were sophisticated and challenging. A compliance officer from a major pharmaceutical company asked about balancing patient safety with profit pressures. A manufacturing executive wanted guidance on handling environmental compliance issues that could affect hundreds of jobs. These were exactly the kinds of complex ethical dilemmas that made this work intellectually engaging. Unlike the black-and-white fraud cases that had defined my early career, these situations required nuanced analysis and creative solutions that balanced competing interests. After the presentation, I was surrounded by business cards and requests for consulting services. Companies wanted help implementing whistleblower protection programs, designing ethics training curricula, and conducting compliance audits that would identify problems before they became criminal matters. Ms. Parker approached a woman in an expensive suit who introduced herself as the CEO of Creative Solutions. "I was hoping we could discuss your availability for a consulting engagement." The irony wasn't lost on me. Creative Solutions was the company that had fired me for refusing to falsify client reports, and now their CEO wanted to hire me to prevent similar problems. The conversation was professionally cordial, but I could see the discomfort in her expression as she acknowledged their previous misunderstanding about my employment termination. Similar conversations followed throughout the afternoon. Sterling Consulting's managing partner wanted help designing audit integrity protocols. Bradford Marketing's new diversity director requested guidance on compliance monitoring systems. Each of these companies had terminated me for reporting the exact problems they now wanted my help solving. The most satisfying moment came when Morrison Tech's chief human resources officer approached me with a formal written apology for my wrongful termination and a request for consultation on their sexual harassment prevention program. "Ms. Parker," she said, handing me an official company letter, "Morrison Tech recognizes that your termination was inappropriate and contrary to our stated values. We'd like to offer you a consulting contract to help us implement the kind of reporting system that could have prevented the Bradley Evans situation." Reading the letter felt like closing a chapter on years of self-doubt and professional uncertainty. Morrison Tech was acknowledging that their retaliation against me had been wrong and that my ethical standards had been correct all along. Marcus found me during the cocktail reception that followed the conference, his expression reflecting pride and amusement. "You've certainly made an impression on the business community. I've had 6 people ask me if Dataflow would consider licensing our ethics program to other companies. Are you considering it?" "Actually, yes. Your work has created intellectual property that could be valuable to other organizations. We're thinking about establishing a consulting division within Dataflow that would market our ethics and compliance systems." The suggestion was exciting and terrifying simultaneously. Building a consulting practice around business ethics would require expanding my expertise and taking on responsibilities I'd never imagined when I'd started this journey. "Would you be interested in heading that division?" Marcus continued. "It would mean a significant promotion and the opportunity to work with companies across multiple industries." The offer represented professional recognition beyond anything I'd dreamed possible 3 years earlier. From junior analyst to director of a new consulting division, with the opportunity to influence ethical standards across corporate America. "Yes," I said without hesitation. "I'd be very interested in that opportunity." Over the following months, Dataflow's Ethics and Compliance Consulting Division became one of the company's fastest-growing business units. We worked with companies in finance, healthcare, manufacturing, and technology to implement comprehensive integrity programs that addressed their specific industry challenges. The work was intellectually stimulating and morally satisfying in ways I'd never experienced before. Instead of fighting against unethical practices, I was helping organizations build systems that prevented those practices from developing in the first place. The media attention was unexpected but welcome. Business journals wrote articles about Dataflow's consulting success and my role in developing practical ethics solutions. I was invited to speak at universities about integrating moral principles with business strategy. Professional organizations asked me to serve on committees that developed industry standards for ethical conduct. Tyler's embezzlement case had become a Harvard Business School case study in corporate fraud detection and family enablement dynamics. Gerald's predatory targeting of elderly victims was featured in training materials for financial services companies. Their crimes had become teaching tools that helped other people recognize and prevent similar situations. The irony was profound. Tyler and Gerald's attempts to destroy my career had ultimately established me as a national expert in the ethical standards they'd violated. Their systematic dishonesty had created opportunities for me to advocate for systematic honesty. 18 months after Tyler's conviction, I received a letter that marked the completion of my professional transformation. The American Association of Business Ethics had selected me to receive their annual Integrity in Leadership Award, recognizing my contributions to corporate ethics and my courage in exposing systematic fraud. The award ceremony was held in Chicago at a gala dinner, attended by business leaders from across the country. As I stood at the podium accepting recognition for work that had grown out of the worst period of my life, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this moment. Tyler was serving his sentence at a federal prison in Pennsylvania, hopefully learning from the consequences of his choices. Gerald was at a different facility in Ohio, participating in gambling addiction treatment as part of his rehabilitation program. I was building a career that aligned perfectly with my values while helping other people avoid the ethical pitfalls that had destroyed my family. The path from victimization to vindication had been longer and more difficult than I could have imagined, but it had led to work that felt like my true calling, rather than just a job. As I looked out at an audience of people who respected my expertise and valued my contributions, I realized that Tyler's cruel toast about stripping had been wrong in ways he'd never understand. I'd found my niche, and it was exactly where I belonged. 2 years into Tyler's sentence, I received my first letter from him since his conviction. The envelope arrived at my new apartment forwarded through Dataflow's corporate office, and I stared at it for several days before finding the courage to read its contents. The letter was written on standard prison stationery in Tyler's familiar handwriting, but the tone was completely different from the manipulative desperation I'd heard during our last phone conversation before his trial. Judith. The letter began, "I know I have no right to contact you after everything I've done, but I wanted you to know that I've been participating in therapy programs here that have helped me understand the damage I caused to you and to the other people I hurt." I read the letter carefully, looking for signs of the manipulation and excuse-making that had characterized Tyler's previous communications. Instead, I found what appeared to be genuine accountability and recognition of the harm his choices had created. I used to tell myself that I was protecting our family, but I've learned that I was actually protecting my own ego and avoiding responsibility for my choices. I sabotaged your career because I was afraid your success would highlight my own mediocrity. I stole money from companies because I wanted to appear successful while taking shortcuts instead of doing the actual work. The letter continued for 3 pages, detailing his participation in a cognitive behavioral therapy program that addressed criminal thinking patterns and a financial responsibility course that taught budgeting and ethical decision-making. Tyler also mentioned that he'd been working in the prison library helping other inmates prepare for their GED examinations. "I'm not writing to ask for forgiveness or to request that you visit me in prison," Tyler concluded. "I know that rebuilding trust requires actions over time, not just words in a letter. I'm writing because I want you to know that your decision to testify truthfully was the right choice, even though it was painful for me. I needed to face consequences for my actions instead of being protected from them." The letter was signed simply, "Your brother Tyler," without any of the emotional manipulation or family loyalty appeals that had characterized his previous communications. I set the letter aside and considered my response carefully. Tyler appeared to be making genuine progress in understanding the impact of his choices, but I'd learned to be cautious about family members who claimed to have changed their behavior patterns. After discussing the letter with Dr. Sarah Martinez, the therapist I'd been seeing to process the trauma of family betrayal, I decided to write back with careful boundaries clearly established. Tyler. I wrote, "I'm glad to hear that you're participating in programs that help you understand the consequences of your choices. I appreciate your acknowledgement that my testimony was truthful and necessary." I continued by explaining my current life and career success, not to hurt him, but to demonstrate that I'd thrived after removing the toxic family dynamics from my life. I described the ethics consulting division I was heading and the satisfaction I found in work that aligned with my values. "I'm open to occasional correspondence as you continue your rehabilitation, but I want to be clear about my boundaries. I won't provide financial support, I won't keep secrets about your situation, and I won't pretend that our relationship can return to what it was before your crimes were exposed. Any future relationship between us must be built on honesty and mutual respect rather than family obligation." Tyler's response arrived 6 weeks later, accepting my boundaries without argument and sharing updates about his continued therapy and educational progress. He'd earned his paralegal certification through the prison's vocational program and was working with other inmates on appeals and legal research. "I understand why you need those boundaries," he wrote, "and I respect your decision to prioritize your own well-being. I hope that someday I can demonstrate through my actions that I've learned from my mistakes, but I know that rebuilding trust takes time. Our correspondence continued sporadically over the following year, with Tyler sharing updates about his rehabilitation and me occasionally describing my professional achievements. The relationship was nothing like our previous sibling dynamic, but it was built on honesty rather than manipulation. Gerald's situation was more complicated. He'd served 18 months of his sentence when I received a call from his prison counselor requesting a family conference to discuss his release planning and restitution arrangements. Ms. Parker, the counselor explained, "Your father has completed our gambling addiction treatment program and is preparing for release in 6 months. As part of his rehabilitation plan, he's requested the opportunity to make amends to family members he's harmed." I agreed to participate in a supervised phone conference with Gerald, his counselor, and a victim advocate. The conversation was structured around Gerald's acceptance of responsibility for his gambling addiction and his understanding of how his choices had affected other people. "Judith," Gerald said, his voice smaller and more hesitant than I'd ever heard it, "I owe you an enormous apology for the way I treated you and the damage I caused to your life." Unlike Tyler's initial manipulative attempts to minimize his responsibility, Gerald's apology was specific and comprehensive. He acknowledged lying about his gambling, manipulating me into providing money that enabled his addiction, and failing to support my career while claiming credit for my achievements. "I've learned in treatment that addiction doesn't excuse the choices I made to hurt other people," Gerald continued. "I chose to prioritize my gambling over my children's well-being, and I chose to blame you for problems that I created." The counselor guided Gerald through a detailed accounting of the financial damage his addiction had caused the money Tyler and I had provided the funds he'd stolen from elderly clients and the indirect costs of Tyler's crimes that had been motivated by pressure to cover Gerald's debts. "I'm working with a restitution coordinator to develop a payment plan for my elderly victims," Gerald explained. "It will take me years to repay what I stole, but I'm committed to making full restitution regardless of how long it takes." Gerald had secured employment with a nonprofit organization that provided financial counseling to low-income families' work that would allow him to use his experience with financial mistakes to help other people avoid similar problems. His salary would be modest, but it would provide enough income to support basic living expenses while making restitution payments. "I don't expect you to welcome me back into your life immediately," Gerald said toward the end of our conversation. "I know I need to demonstrate real change through my actions over time, but I wanted you to know that I finally understand how much damage I caused and how wrong I was to expect you to protect me from consequences." The conversation was emotionally draining but somehow cathartic. For the first time in my adult life, Gerald was accepting full responsibility for his choices and their impact on other people. He wasn't making excuses, blaming external circumstances, or expecting me to minimize his accountability. After Gerald's release from prison, we began meeting monthly for coffee at a neutral location, always with clear time boundaries and specific topics for discussion. These conversations were nothing like our previous family interactions. They were structured around Gerald's continued accountability and my need to maintain emotional safety. Gerald attended Gamblers Anonymous meetings twice weekly and worked with a sponsor who helped him navigate situations that might trigger relapse. He lived in a modest studio apartment and drove a used car lifestyle changes that reflected his commitment to financial responsibility rather than the appearance of success. I spent decades living beyond my means and expecting other people to cover the consequences, Gerald reflected during one of our coffee meetings. Learning to live within my actual income has been humbling, but it's also been honest in a way I'd forgotten was possible. His restitution payments to elderly victims were proceeding on schedule, and several of his victims had written letters acknowledging his efforts to make amends. The payments would continue for nearly a decade, but Gerald seemed committed to fulfilling his obligations regardless of the personal sacrifice involved. The relationship I developed with Gerald was built on clear boundaries and mutual respect rather than the family loyalty that had enabled his destructive behavior for years. I supported his recovery efforts by acknowledging his progress, but I didn't provide financial assistance or emotional caretaking that might enable relapse. "You were right to set boundaries with me," Gerald said during one of our conversations. "I spent too many years expecting my children to solve problems that only I could address." The healing process was slow and sometimes painful, but it was based on genuine accountability rather than superficial reconciliation. Both Tyler and Gerald were learning to take responsibility for their choices while respecting my need to prioritize my own well-being. For the first time in my adult life, family relationships were built on honesty and mutual respect rather than obligation and enablement. The transformation wasn't complete, but it was real and sustainable. As I reflected on the progress we'd all made, I realized that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for family members is refuse to protect them from the consequences of their choices. Tyler and Gerald had both needed to face the full impact of their actions before they could begin genuine rehabilitation. The family I was rebuilding was smaller and more careful than what we'd had before, but it was built on authentic principles rather than dysfunction. And that foundation made all the difference in creating relationships that could actually last. The success of Dataflow's ethics and compliance consulting division exceeded everyone's expectations, including my own. Within 3 years, we'd grown from a small internal department to a recognized industry leader with clients across North America and expanding international interest. The work was challenging and meaningful, but it was my evolving relationship with Marcus that truly transformed my understanding of what professional and personal partnerships could look like. What had begun as a CEO's recognition of an employee's potential had developed into a genuine friendship built on shared values and mutual respect. Marcus and I worked together closely on consulting projects, often traveling to client sites and spending long hours developing customized ethics programs for complex organizations. The transition from professional collaboration to personal interest happened gradually, marked by conversations that extended beyond work topics and a growing appreciation for each other's perspectives on life beyond corporate ethics. Marcus was brilliant and principled, but he was also funny and kind in ways that had nothing to do with business success. "You know," Marcus said during a flight back from a consulting engagement in Seattle, "I never expected that Tyler's embezzlement case would lead to the best professional partnership of my career." We were sitting in first-class seats reviewing client feedback forms and planning our next consulting project, but the conversation had drifted toward more personal topics as our flight approached the East Coast. "I certainly never expected that my brother's criminal activities would lead to the career I'd always dreamed of," I replied. "It's strange how the worst experiences sometimes create space for the best opportunities." Marcus smiled, and I noticed again how his expression softened when we weren't in formal business mode. "Speaking of opportunities, would you be interested in having dinner with me tomorrow night? Not a business dinner, just a personal one." The invitation wasn't entirely surprising. Our working relationship had developed an undertone of personal interest that we'd both been careful not to acknowledge directly. Dating someone you worked closely with involved complications that neither of us had wanted to rush into exploring. "I'd like that," I said, feeling both excitement and nervousness about crossing the line from professional partnership to personal relationship. Our first official date was at a small Italian restaurant downtown, far removed from the corporate dining rooms where we usually shared meals. Marcus had made reservations under his first name, rather than his title, and he'd chosen a table in the back corner where we could talk privately without interruption. "I have to admit," Marcus said over appetizers, "I've been wanting to ask you out for months, but I was concerned about the professional implications." "I've been thinking the same thing," I replied honestly. "Dating someone I work with closely involves risks I've never had to navigate before." We spent the evening discussing how we might handle the personal and professional aspects of a relationship, establishing boundaries that would protect both our working partnership and any romantic connection that might develop. The conversation was thoughtful and careful, reflecting the analytical approach we both brought to complex problems. "I think the key is complete transparency," Marcus said as we shared dessert. If we're going to explore a personal relationship, we need to be able to separate that from our professional collaboration without compromising either one. Agreed, and we need to be prepared for the possibility that a romantic relationship might not work out while still maintaining our professional partnership. The discussion felt very much like two business professionals negotiating a complex contract, but it also felt right for who we were as people. We were both cautious about relationships because we'd both been hurt by people who'd prioritized personal convenience over ethical behavior. Our second date was a weekend hiking trip in the mountains, an opportunity to see each other outside the corporate environment entirely. Marcus was an experienced hiker who'd grown up camping with his family, and he'd planned a moderate trail that would challenge us physically without overwhelming my limited outdoor experience. "This is completely different from board meetings and client presentations," I said as we reached a scenic overlook with views of the valley below. "That's exactly why I wanted to do this," Marcus replied. "I wanted to see who you are when you're not being the brilliant ethics consultant who's transforming corporate America." The weekend revealed aspects of Marcus's personality that I'd only glimpsed during business travel: his love of photography, his knowledge of local history, and his genuine concern for environmental conservation. He was the same principled and thoughtful person I'd come to respect professionally, but he was also relaxed and playful in ways that his CEO responsibilities rarely allowed. "You know," I said as we sat around a campfire on Saturday night, "I never thought I'd be the kind of person who enjoyed sleeping in a tent and cooking over an open flame." Marcus laughed, his face illuminated by the firelight. "I never thought I'd be the kind of person who'd find corporate ethics consulting romantic, but here we are." Our relationship developed slowly and carefully over the following months, always with attention to maintaining our professional boundaries while exploring our personal connection. We established rules about not discussing work during personal time and not allowing romantic disagreements to affect business decisions. The balance wasn't always easy to maintain, but it was built on the same foundation of honesty and mutual respect that had made our professional partnership successful. Neither of us was interested in relationships that required compromise of our core values, and both of us had learned from previous experiences where personal and professional boundaries had been violated. Marcus met Gerald during one of our monthly coffee sessions, an encounter I'd approached with significant anxiety. The man I was dating was meeting the father who'd nearly destroyed my life through gambling addiction and manipulation. But Gerald's rehabilitation had been genuine, and his interaction with Marcus was respectful and appropriate. "Your father seems to be taking his recovery seriously," Marcus observed afterward. "I can see the family resemblance in terms of intelligence, but he's clearly learned from his mistakes." "It's taken me a long time to trust his progress," I replied, "but he's demonstrated real change through his actions rather than just his words." Tyler's occasional letters had mentioned his curiosity about my personal life, and I'd shared news about my relationship with Marcus in general terms. Tyler's responses had been supportive and appropriate, acknowledging that he was glad to hear about my happiness while respecting the boundaries I'd established. "I hope Marcus appreciates what a remarkable woman he's dating," Tyler had written in one of his letters. "You deserve someone who values your integrity and intelligence." The comment was thoughtful and selfless in ways that the old Tyler would never have managed. His rehabilitation seemed to be producing genuine character growth rather than superficial behavioral compliance. 18 months after our first date, Marcus proposed during a weekend trip to the same mountain overlook where we'd first talked about our personal compatibility. He'd planned the proposal, carefully bringing champagne and a picnic dinner to accompany the sunset views. "Judith," he said, kneeling beside our picnic blanket with a simple but elegant diamond ring, "you've transformed not just my company's approach to ethics, but my understanding of what partnership really means. Will you marry me?" The proposal was perfect because it was authentic to who we were as people and as partners. Marcus wasn't trying to sweep me off my feet with grand gestures. He was offering a genuine commitment based on shared values and proven compatibility. "Yes," I said without hesitation. I can't imagine building a life with anyone else. The engagement ring was beautiful, but not ostentatious, reflecting Marcus's understanding that I valued substance over appearance. The diamond was ethically sourced from a company that supported fair labor practices in developing countries, a detail that demonstrated his attention to my values, even in romantic gestures. Planning our wedding became an extension of our commitment to authenticity and meaningful relationships. We chose a small ceremony with close friends and family members who'd supported our individual growth and professional partnership. The guest list included colleagues from Dataflow, Gerald and Tyler's prison counselor via video conference, and the FBI agents who'd helped expose Tyler's crimes and supported my decision to testify truthfully. This feels like the completion of something, I told Marcus during our final wedding planning session. Not just getting married, but building a life that's completely aligned with my values. Marcus nodded, understanding exactly what I meant. We're not just combining our personal lives. We're creating a partnership that extends our professional mission of promoting integrity and accountability. The wedding was scheduled for the following spring, giving us time to plan a ceremony that would celebrate not just our romantic commitment, but our shared dedication to building lives and careers based on ethical principles. As I reflected on the journey that had brought us to this point, I marveled at how Tyler's attempt to humiliate me had ultimately created the circumstances that led to both professional success and personal happiness. His cruel toast about stripping had backfired in ways he could never have anticipated, opening doors to opportunities that aligned perfectly with my authentic self. The woman who'd stood frozen in that restaurant dining room 3 years ago, devastated by family betrayal and professional sabotage, had become someone who was recognized as an expert in her field and loved by someone who valued her exactly as she was. The transformation was complete, but the best parts of the journey were just beginning. Our wedding took place on a perfect April morning at the Dataflow Corporate Retreat Center, a venue that symbolized the professional partnership that had grown into personal love. The ceremony was held in the garden pavilion overlooking the lake, with spring flowers in bloom, and the mountains providing a spectacular backdrop for our vows. Gerald walked me down the aisle, a privilege he'd earned through 3 years of consistent accountability and genuine change. He wore a simple black suit that reflected his more modest lifestyle, and his eyes filled with tears as he placed my hand in Marcus's with a quiet blessing. "Take care of each other," Gerald said simply, his voice carrying the weight of hard-won wisdom about the importance of authentic love over superficial success. Tyler participated in our ceremony via video conference from the federal facility, where he was completing his sentence. His congratulations were heartfelt and appropriate, acknowledging his happiness for my new life, without any requests for special treatment or emotional manipulation. "Judith has always deserved someone who recognizes her worth," Tyler said during the virtual toast. "Marcus, you're getting the most ethical and intelligent woman I know. Don't ever take that for granted." The ceremony itself was simple but meaningful, with vows that reflected our shared commitment to integrity in both personal and professional aspects of our lives. Marcus and I promised to support each other's values, to face challenges with honesty and courage, and to build a partnership that would contribute positively to the world around us. "I promise to value your principles even when they're inconvenient," Marcus said during his vows, "and to support your commitment to doing the right thing even when it's difficult." My vows reflected the journey that had brought us together. I promise to trust in your respect for my judgment, to share my authentic self without fear of rejection, and to build with you a life that honors the values we both hold dear. The reception was held in the same room where Dataflow's board meetings took place, transformed with flowers and candles into a celebration space that connected our personal happiness with the professional mission we shared. Our colleagues from the Ethics Consulting Division had prepared presentations about the impact our work was having on corporate culture across multiple industries. To Judith and Marcus, toasted Patricia Walsh, who'd become a friend and professional colleague after Henderson and Associates recovered from Tyler's embezzlement scandal, who've demonstrated that integrity and success aren't just compatible, but inseparable. The most meaningful moment of the reception came when Dr. Sarah Martinez, my therapist, presented me with a letter from the elderly victims of Gerald's financial fraud scheme. They'd collectively written to express their gratitude for my decision to testify truthfully despite family pressure. Ms. Parker, the letter read, "Your courage in exposing your father's crimes helped us recover our stolen retirement funds and prevented him from victimizing other seniors. Your example shows that doing the right thing is always worth the personal cost." Reading their words while surrounded by friends and colleagues who'd supported my journey felt like the ultimate vindication of every difficult choice I'd made. The pain of family betrayal had been transformed into purpose that benefited people I'd never even met. Marcus and I honeymooned in Switzerland, hiking through alpine meadows and visiting companies that were implementing environmental and social responsibility programs based on ethical frameworks we'd helped develop. Even our vacation reflected the integration of personal happiness with professional mission that defined our partnership. 5 years ago, I said as we sat on a mountain terrace overlooking Lake Geneva, I never could have imagined that my life would look like this. Marcus took my hand, his wedding ring catching the afternoon sunlight. Tyler's toast about stripping was wrong in every possible way. You found your true calling, and it's exactly what the world needs. Returning to work after our honeymoon felt like stepping into the next chapter of a story that was still being written. The Ethics and Compliance Consulting Division had grown to include 12 full-time employees and partnerships with universities to develop curriculum for business ethics education. I was invited to serve on the board of directors for the International Association of Business Ethics, a position that would allow me to influence standards development across global markets. Marcus was appointed to chair the Business Roundtable's Committee on Corporate Social Responsibility, recognizing data flow's leadership in integrity-based business practices. The work we were doing together was having measurable impact on corporate culture. Companies that implemented our ethics programs showed significant reductions in regulatory violations, employee lawsuits, and reputation crises. More importantly, they reported higher employee satisfaction and stronger client relationships based on trust rather than just competitive pricing. Tyler was released from federal prison after serving 6 years of his 8-year sentence. His early release earned through consistent participation in rehabilitation programs and exemplary conduct. He'd completed associate degree programs in paralegal studies and business ethics planning to use his experience with financial crimes to help other people avoid similar mistakes. I want to work with nonprofit organizations that serve at-risk communities. Tyler told me during our first in-person conversation after his release, "I can't undo the damage I caused, but I can use what I've learned to help other people make better choices." Tyler's rehabilitation appeared genuine and sustained. He lived modestly, worked hard, and maintained the boundaries I'd established without complaint or manipulation. Our relationship would never return to what it had been before his crimes, but it had evolved into something healthier based on honesty and mutual respect. Gerald continued his work with the financial counseling nonprofit, having been promoted to senior counselor after demonstrating exceptional success in helping clients overcome debt and develop healthy money management habits. His restitution payments were nearly complete, and several of his elderly victims had written letters acknowledging his transformation. I spent too many years defining success as having more money than I could afford to lose, Gerald reflected during one of our quarterly family dinners. Now I measure success by helping other people avoid the mistakes that nearly destroyed our family. The family I'd rebuilt was smaller and more careful than what we'd had before, but it was built on authentic principles rather than enabling dynamics. Gerald and Tyler had both learned to take responsibility for their choices while respecting my need to prioritize my own well-being and growth. As I sat in my office 5 years after that devastating promotion party, reviewing applications for our newest ethics consultant position, I reflected on the complete transformation of my life's trajectory. The woman who'd been humiliated by her brother's cruel toast had become a respected expert whose work was influencing corporate culture across multiple industries. The marriage I'd built with Marcus was based on shared values and mutual respect, rather than compromise of core principles. The family relationships I'd rebuilt were grounded in accountability and healthy boundaries, rather than obligation and enablement. The career I'd created aligned perfectly with my authentic self, rather than requiring constant adaptation to unethical environments. Tyler's attempt to destroy my reputation had inadvertently created the platform for me to advocate for the ethical standards he'd violated. Gerald's gambling addiction and manipulation had taught me to value relationships built on honesty rather than family loyalty. The companies that had fired me for reporting misconduct now sought my expertise to prevent similar problems. Every painful experience had contributed to building a life that was more meaningful and authentic than anything I could have achieved by compromising my values or accepting other people's definitions of success. The journey from humiliation to vindication had been longer and more difficult than I'd ever imagined possible, but it had led to work that felt like my true calling and relationships that honored my authentic self. As I finished reviewing the consultant applications and prepared to leave for another romantic dinner with my husband, I realized that Tyler's cruel prediction had been wrong in every possible way. I had found my niche, and it was exactly where I belonged. But more importantly, I'd learned that true success comes from staying true to your values, even when doing so requires enormous personal courage. Integrity and achievement aren't competing goals. They're complementary aspects of a life lived authentically. The woman who'd been told she should consider stripping had instead stripped away everything false and built a life based on genuine principles. And that transformation had made all the difference. Now, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever faced a situation where family members pressured you to compromise your values to protect their reputation or interests? How did you handle the conflict between loyalty and integrity? Share your experiences in the comments below your story. Might help someone else who's struggling with similar challenges. If this story resonated with you, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to hear more stories about people who chose courage over comfort and integrity over convenience. And if you know someone who might benefit from hearing about the power of ethical decision-making, even when it's personally costly, please share this story with them. Thank you for listening to my journey from betrayal to triumph. Remember that your values are worth defending, even when the people closest to you don't understand that choice. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable destructive behavior, regardless of family pressure or social expectations. Stay strong, stay honest, and never compromise your integrity for people who wouldn't do the same for you.